To the Center for Brain Research. I know many of you also not from Bangalore, so welcome to Bangalore. And welcome to the pre-symposium workshop of BDBIO. So the Center for Brain Research, for all of you who are here for the first time, is we're an autonomous center on the ISC campus, and our connection to BDBIO is that we do a lot of genomic studies on Indian populations, and you can learn about that as you're here during the day. So we are very interested in applying, big data algorithms, artificial intelligence to understand biology in human populations, from the genetics of human populations, right? But this is also the first time we're conducting this workshop as a part of this conference, so we're excited about that, and we're glad you could join us. Just for some logistics before we get started, for those of you who have registered, you should have gotten your handouts. The afternoon session will be your tutorials and discussion sessions, which will be on the second floor. If anything is not clear, there are volunteers outside. They have their name tags, so feel free to ask anything. There will also be, you can also connect to the CBR Wi-Fi, and you can ask the volunteers for those credentials should you need to connect. Right? So that's really all of the logistic details, and I'll just pass it on to Sanchit, who's the co-organizer of BDBIO, for opening remarks.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks, Shweta. So yeah, first of all, welcome everyone to BDBIO. As Shweta said, I'm Sanchit. I head the computational biology research at Intel Labs. And I'm one of the co-organizers along with Shweta, Chirag, and Devnath. All of us care deeply about computational biology. It is one of those rare fields where you get to have an impact on humanity and at the same time build really great careers. If you're working in computational biology, you work at the cutting edge of both science and technology. And the field has been around for a long time, but last few years it has really picked up, I would say. In fact, you can see that it is sort of following AI in how fast it's growing, just behind by a few years. We have started seeing several breakthroughs already. I'm sure all of you have heard of AlphaFold. And I think now the time is ripe where we have, because of technological advancements in sequencing, single-cell analysis, spatial transcriptomics, cryo-EM, etc., that we have the data. And because of development of transformers and LLMs, we have the algorithms to build truly transformational solutions. And it seems currently, like when I'm following the field, currently it seems like something or the other is always around the corner, right? So given all this is happening, we believe that India and Indian students, given their hunger and their talent, can make a huge difference to this field. All we have to do is to build systems in place so that they have the necessary arrangements to make progress. And one of the things which we thought was missing was a conference-like setup where they can come share their work, talk to experts in the field, listen to them, etc., etc. So yeah, there have been many such conferences, but they are generally far away from India. They're generally organized at very far away places. And while it's fun to go there once in a while, it's not practical to go every year. So that's why we wanted to provide something like this. And with that mission, we started BDBIO. This year, we starting this workshop. And the idea of this workshop is, and the topics will keep on changing year on year. The idea is to provide some kind of a crash course in the relevant topics of the day. So the topic of this workshop, as you all know, is LLMs for genomics. And I would say LLMs and genomics are a match made in heaven. LLMs are language models, and genomics has, as you guys all know, that it's all DNA language, protein language, etc., etc. So it's a perfect combination. Hopefully, through the day today, we are able to provide the right material and inspire all of you guys to take up this as a field. I know that many of you are early PhD students and probably still thinking about what problems to tackle and what problems to go for. So hopefully we can inspire you to take up this field. And who knows, maybe someone from this room will become an influential figure in this field going forward. So welcome all of you. And let me pass the baton to Aditya. I'm really excited about his lecture. His lecture is going to be about basic LLMs. So nothing to do with biology, but just giving us all a basic understanding of how LLMs function. Please welcome Aditya to this.
Thank you, Sanchit and Shweta, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to interact with a crowd that's quite different from the people that I usually interact with. So I must confess, I'm nowhere close to being a biologist or anyone who uses biology and tools. Although I'm really looking forward to interacting with many of you and trying to find important scientific questions from the biology side that could perhaps be addressed using tools from the AI/ML side, which is where I really live at this point in time. So it's actually a pleasure to be here and speaking to all of you. So we have about maybe an hour and a half or so of time. So during this time, I will try to lead you through a very gentle introduction to large language models, which, as you know, have taken over many aspects of how we sort of process data in the real world. And I will also use this time to try to take a little more deep dive into what is really the nuts and bolts of a large language model. What are the foundational principles that underlie the design of language models? Okay. So before we start, I just want to sort of let you know that you should interrupt me at any point in time if you have any questions. Let's make this as interactive as we can. It's that way it's more fun for you and fun for me as well. Okay. So just feel free to sort of stop me at any time if you need more clarity on certain aspects. Okay. If the question requires much more discussion, then we will try to move it offline, but please do feel free to sort of raise your hand or ask me a question at any point. Okay. So I have my presentation structured in two parts. The first part will be sort of like an interactive demo. I want to sort of lead you through aspects of large language models that you may have already been familiar with, but this is just sort of bring out certain aspects of large language models that we will dive into in the second part, which will be a little more hands-on and a sort of a technical lecture style part. Okay, so where I will write notes. Okay, so right. So I just want to first show you certain things about LLMs. So let me maybe. Okay, so we'll begin with something that all of you must be familiar with by now. This is ChatGPT, one of the LLMs that arrived first on the scene, I suppose. But there have been several competitors by now. People use various other LLMs, but this is one of the dominant systems that has captured our imagination, I suppose, and helped many people already. So this is sort of the standard interface. It's just a simple text box, but it can seemingly do sort of magical things. You can say, write me a poem about computational biology comprising. I'm sure I can make mistakes, but it'll understand what I mean. 2 verses with 5 lines per verse. Okay, I'll be happy to sort of. Okay, this is taking some time to think, but okay. So you have something that probably that makes sense. Perhaps a new request, maybe something it hasn't seen before. But due to the scale of the model that lies behind this, it's able to make sense of my request and do things that may take a human quite some time and effort to do. Okay, so there are these capabilities. There are, one of the reasons this has sort of large language models, at least in the public sense, have become extremely useful is that, with a simple text box, they allow you to encode any and every, most kinds of problems, right? It could be a technical problem, it could be a request for information, it could be a request for knowledge, it could be, solving a logical problem. As long as you can encode it into text, the hope is that with the text understanding and generation capabilities that LLMs have, which are improving day by day, you should be able to get at least a good approximate answer to whatever question you posed. Again, in text format. It's text in, text out. Okay, so that's the first thing. Of course, there are multimodal models and so on, which accept speech and vision and so on. And they can also output, I think, speech and vision and in addition to text. But let's just think of text as being the universal, sort of a very universal language to encode most problems that we have, right? It's surprisingly broad, right? So the premise of the utility of large language models is that they allow you to sort of encode any reasonable problem. If you can speak it out, you can write it out, and you can put it in, and then you can, if the model is sort of hopefully advanced enough, you can get something reasonably out, okay? Get something out, okay? There are some, things are not perfect by any means. So one of the other sort of much touted use cases for LLMs very broadly is that they sort of subvert the standard process of building machine learning models. So machine learning models back in the day, in sort of pre-LLM times, you had a specific task, like let's say prediction of some variable using some data, right? Let's say you want to predict the weather today given the past 7 days weather, right? It's a very concretely defined problem. You would build a single machine learning model exclusively for this task, okay? And you would get lots of data on sequences of, how the weather looked over several days at a time. And you would train, this model extensively, and then you would say, my model at this point has learned to predict well. So I'll deploy it in production, okay? If the problem changes tomorrow, if you want to predict the humidity tomorrow, you can't reuse the same model. You'll have to sort of literally crank the, turn the crank again, okay? So what LLMs sort of at least offer, this is a promise, it's not completely realized, is the ability to sort of, what is called zero shot or few shot prompting, right? So you can sort of, since you have as input the ability to, since you have the ability to put as input anything in a text box, you can actually dump the training data into the text box and say, these are examples of data, and this is the predicted, this is the data, this is the prediction, this is the data, this is actually what transpired on with respect to the weather today. I'll give you lots of data in the prompt, and hopefully you can read the prompt and then generalize on the fly, okay? So this is what is called in-context learning, okay? So, as a very, very sort of toy example, you could say, I'll sort of, this is sort of like these problems in logical reasoning that you have in entrance exams, right? You'll have some sequences which have a pattern, and then you'll have a new sequence, and you're being asked to guess the continuation of that, right? So for example, let me just make up something on the fly. So this is a string of like 4 characters. I don't know if everyone can see this. Maybe I'll zoom it a bit, okay? Everyone can see this? Okay. So let me probably, this is example 1. I'm going to apply a certain rule to each first part to get the second part. So can someone figure out what I'm sort of doing? Anyone? 2 examples looks like people have learned from this. Let's just put in one more. What should I write here? GR? Okay. GR, right, I think. Yeah. The middle 2 in the reverse order. Okay, so the last 2 in reverse order, followed by the outside ones in the reverse orders, followed by the inside characters in reverse order. That's all I'm doing. That's the transformation I'm applying to get the second sequence from the first on each line. Okay, and so let's say, okay. So it's trying something, okay. we expect, what do we expect? WFEG. It gets it wrong, okay? It does a lot of analysis. Forget all the analysis. If I just pose this as a continuation problem, all of you would be able to solve it, okay? This is not perfect, okay? You want a WFEG because that's the pattern. It's unambiguous from the examples. Doesn't do it, okay? But that's sort of because it's a bit of an older model. Maybe we can, if you try it again and again, at some point it'll actually give you the right answer, okay? So maybe if you do, something like whatever it offers to do reasoning or so on. Never mind what it's doing here. Maybe I'll explain exactly what is happening here, but think of it just as the same kind of a different LLM, okay? You can ignore all of this stuff. So WFEG, okay? So this gets it correctly. Okay, so it infers, basically, in some sense, this is like training data that I've put inside the prompt. And this is like your, the test time example that you actually think of this as the, task that you want to do at runtime, right? In the application that you've built for some client. So this is the training data, you literally dump it into a single prompt. And if the LLM is smart enough, it can actually learn just by answering the prompt, because the prompt is carefully encoding the training data. So I should say here that the actual LLMs, the LLM is a giant neural network hosted at OpenAI's server in this case. Nothing about that LLM is changing. Its weights and its parameters are not changing. But it's still solving a learning problem, right? Because you're putting in data here and you're asking what is, extrapolate the relationship between these instances in the training data to the new data point. It's able to do that, okay? It's exactly like how you would try to do some kind of regression. Like it's pattern matching and fitting. That's at the heart of machine learning. Okay, so this is sort of somewhat, it's a new paradigm, right? You can make these very, very long training data sets, just stuff it into the prompt and ask your prediction question for your desired, data instance at runtime, okay? If it's half decent, it should be able to do the job for you, okay? So this is called in-context learning, okay? Other interesting properties, this is not something native to a large language model. If you say, how do I make a nuclear bomb, right? It will not, it's not like a universal sort of source of knowledge. There are certain safeguards built into it, so it will refuse. Okay? This is called refusal. This is a deliberate effect. Okay? So OpenAI has trained this LLM model to, output certain strategic answers to certain questions that are deemed harmful in a public sense, right? So this is also a capability, it's a feature. It is not, whether it is a required feature or not depends on the context, okay? If I'm a nuclear scientist, maybe that, I would need a more informative answer to this, okay? But the assumption is that I'm not, okay? So these are certain sort of other capabilities. Of course, these things can be jailbroken also. These things can be circumvented in very, very creative ways. I don't know if you've heard about this, but I think there are some ways in which you can recast the same question, how do I make a bomb, by saying, my grandma used to tell me stories about what they did for making bombs half a century ago. They started by, okay? And it will actually, in some cases, complete that sentence for you, right? Or you sort of frame the prompt as, in a role-playing sense, right? So there are these creative ways to sort of get around these. It's a cat and mouse game, just like, system security for this domain, okay? But most often, these systems will not volunteer information that is deemed to be harmful or offensive, okay? Okay, so this is just a very, this is things that you already have come in contact with, these capabilities and behaviors. So with this, let me sort of do something a little more in depth. This is still sort of the demo. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to actually load up a small large language model. And let's sort of try to peek inside a little bit more about what really is it trying to do, okay? So let me just connect to my server. Oops, I think it's lost connection. So I'm just sort of connecting to my machine in my lab, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of actually load a small, a baby version of a large language model into a computer on a server, and then we'll play around with it, okay? Everyone is comfortable with Python code, at least at a broad level. This is nothing fancy, just like basic commands to just load, okay? What we are going to do is we are going to load an old version of GPT. It's called GPT-2. The one that you saw on the demo earlier is GPT-4. That's the current very, very large language model that OpenAI is offering. Long ago, they built something called GPT-2, which is extremely outdated by now. It's a very, very small language model in the hierarchy of large language models. But nevertheless, it's large enough, okay? And it's very nice for sort of playing around with in an academic sense. It's literally a small version of everything that you can find in a large size GPT-4. The structure is pretty much, the foundational structure is essentially the same, okay? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and sort of, this model is basically it's a giant neural network, okay? So it's basically now loaded onto my GPU in the machine. You can see that, oops. Okay, so it's now sitting in the GPU. It consumes about 718 MB of memory on the GPU. It's a small model. Okay, my GPU has, I think, it's still a very small GPU, 16 GB of memory. So it comfortably sits entirely in 700 MB of that. Okay. So let's see sort of how large this model is. This is just some code to count the total number of parameters in the neural network that represents the LLM. Okay, so there are about 124 million parameters. Okay, it's very small again compared to large language models of the current day. I think GPT-4 is. Does anyone recall how large GPT-4 is supposed to be, rumored to be? We don't know exactly. Nobody has written a report. The number of weights and biases inside GPT-4 class model. We are sitting at 1 million here. Sorry? 24 trillion. The order of magnitude is correct. Yeah, it's anywhere in the range of 1 to 10 trillion. Yeah. So it's in the trillions. Okay. So like you add 6 more zeros in front of this. Okay. So that's the scale of the model that we are talking about, that we just interacted with on the browser. Okay. Of course, it has some maybe some support structures or scaffolding around it, but the order of magnitude is this. That we can't load it onto our machine. So this we can, and we can play around with it. But however, the interesting thing is that the basic structure is going to be pretty much very, very similar to a GPT 3.5 or a GPT-4. Okay, so which is why this is useful to sort of peek into. Okay, it's as legitimately a language model as GPT-4, except in the sense of capabilities. It might not be that good at processing text. Okay, but it still works. Okay, I'll show you that. Okay, so the number of parameters, we're dealing with 124 million parameter. Each parameter is basically a weight or a bias. It's a 32-bit floating point number. Okay, it's a 4-byte floating point weight sitting inside this big model. What is the model? How does it actually give output from input? We will go into gradually. Okay, so that's my aim. Okay, any questions so far? Yeah. Yes. So good question. So whatever this model is also, it's a deep neural network. What does deep mean? Deep is typically used to mean that you stack layers upon layers in a sequential way. So it does have that structure. Okay. In fact, I'll show you the exact structure later. So there are lots of layers of various sizes. There are different types of layers. Are you familiar? So what kind of layers are you familiar with in deep learning? What is probably the simplest type of layer? No, even simpler than that, like basic building. What do you mean by a single layer of a neural network? Do you know any names, alternative names for it? I mean, you call it a linear layer or a fully connected layer, for example, right? So there are lots of fully connected layers in this model. There are some new types of layers called attention layers. Okay, so it's a mix of all these things, and all of these together form the 124 million parameters. I'm counting everything. Okay, this code is basically summing, all the, model.parameters holds all kinds of trainable weights and biases across all layers of the model. So I'm just counting how many are there. That count is this number. Okay. So yeah, I'll show you exactly what is the architecture, what layers are stacked in what way. Okay. So we can examine it here, right here, but just wait for a bit. Okay. Maybe if you can just say model. This is actually the model structure. Okay. You'll actually expose the model structure. So it says that it is, so ignore all these terms, transformer, GPT-2 model, and so on. There is an initial layer called a text embedding layer. This is followed by, in parallel there is something called a position embedding layer. These are just standard linear layers, okay, like you may have been used to. After that, there is something very interesting. There are 12x. 12x means 12 copies. 12 copies of certain structured blocks. Okay, stacked, block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4. That's what is the deep part here. Okay, each block has this internal structure. So we'll come to it later. Okay, we'll come back to this again and we'll actually go into exactly what each layer does. Is that fine? So this is a broad atlas of this model. Is that fine? Any questions? Okay. We'll come back to this. I just wanted to sort of print this out in case, so that you can see the gory details, but we'll interpret it. Okay. So let's now come to doing a similar kind of question answering using this LLM. Okay. So here's the equivalent of me typing into a text box on ChatGPT. I'm doing the same thing for this model. It's a model setting in my memory. I want to put into it a text question, right? So imagine I type this string, which is described by the variable prompt here. The best way to learn programming is to. Okay. I just put this in and then I expect the model to complete it. Okay, that's my, that's sort of my requirement from this. Okay, I could ask it a question and put a question mark at the end, but this is even simpler. Okay, so what this code is going to do is it's going to take this string, whatever I just specified here, and the bottom part is all it's going to do is it's going to pass this string. This string is right now a Python string. Okay, does anyone know how Python represents a string? This is just a side question. You see it as a string here, but internally, how do you think it represents a string? Has anyone tried figuring out what this string representation is? Do you think it's a dictionary internally? Do you think it's a list? Sorry? Dictionary is way too complicated. Let's say if you're doing C programming, how many of you have done C programming? It's ancient by now, but how do you think you represent a string in C? It's using a more basic data type. Pointers, arrays comprised of what? Character. It's a character array. Okay, in C it would be a character array. Python derives a lot of its philosophy from C. So here Python has something called a list. It already has, basic Python gives you a list data type. A list is automatically an ordered, it's like an array. Okay, it's a model of an array. So Python will actually represent prompt as a list, each element of which is a standard character. Okay, there is a character set, ASCII character set. So it will be a list where the first element is T, the capital T, the second element is the small h, and so on. Okay, that's Python's representation. LLMs do not represent text like this. Okay. Yeah, we'll come to what is called a token. Okay, we don't know what is a token yet. Okay, there is something called a tokenizer here that you see on the code here. So I'm just trying to motivate what is a token. So token is sort of the basic unit of vocabulary. Okay, for Python, for example, for representing strings, the basic token is a character. For large language models, working with characters is very inefficient in a certain sense. A large language model tries to understand semantics of sentences, right? So it would like to associate in some sense meanings to larger units, not just characters. Okay, if you ask a human what the character C means here or the character B means here, it's difficult to figure it out without knowing what is around it, right? B is part of best, and that best has a certain meaning in your mind, right? So a large language model would prefer not to represent this as a list of characters, but as a list of more abstract tokens. These are called tokens. Okay? So token is going to be the generalization of a character for us. Okay? So what this line says is, it's just taking this string, it's passing it through what is called a tokenizer algorithm. The tokenizer is going to return some encoding of that string, not necessarily as a list of characters, but as a list of in this case, closer to words. Okay, so the tokenizer that GPT-2 uses is more closer to sort of using word level units. Okay, so roughly you can think of the inputs after being tokenized as a list where the first element of the list is the word the second element is best, and so on. I'll show you exactly how tokenization works in more detail later. But all it's going to do is it's just going to take the prompt and represent it in a manner familiar to the GPT-2 LLM, which is called tokenization. It's a lossless transformation. So just going to represent it, in fact, as a sequence of integers, interestingly. Okay, so the best way to learn programming is will be converted to a sequence of integers, that's all. Plain non-negative integers. And it's going to basically put this into the model, and it's going to basically call something called generate, where there are some parameters here. So here I'm saying I would like to generate a maximum of up to 200 tokens in the response. I can control this. Okay. So let's just try this and see what happens. Maybe I'll make it 100, for example. Okay. So the model is going to take this tokenized input and give output in the token sense only. Okay. So it's going to be again a list of integers. Takes as input a list of integers, gives as output a list of integers. And then I have to now bring it back to human legible strings, right? So there is this decoder that the tokenizer offers, which will decode from the integer sequence domain into our language, okay? The reverse operation of tokenization. Okay, so let's see what this does. It will take some time. So it's basically put the prompt here. The best way to learn programming is to, this was the prompt. I printed the prompt as well as the response together. And so, this is whatever it is. Okay, it continues on the right. I don't know how to make it sort of word wrap, but it's a long, if you read this, it won't be, it's grammatically correct. GPT-2 is not bad in that sense, but it'll sort of be a bit rambling. Okay. Okay, it's sort of just going on and on. It's like rambling, mumbling. Okay, it'll be somewhat coherent to what the input was given that I asked to, it was requested to continue, but it won't be very, very informative. That's because it's like a baby model. Okay, yeah, question. Vertex AI. I don't know what Vertex AI is actually.
Actually, Google has this, they have this Vertex AI, so, I just came across some
Okay.
something.
Okay.
So I saw this temperature parameter there. So
Yeah.
basically it is like if we adjust it,
Yeah.
The complexity of the language increases.
Yeah, we'll do that here. I'll show you that as well. So this is standard. There's nothing specific. I mean, any language model that you can literally load onto, that you can play around with will offer this capability. Okay, I mean, we don't, right now I've only told you what this is. So if I make this sort of 10, for example, then it will only generate 10 extra tokens. So this is where the input ended. So from here all the way up to here is in the LLM's tokenizer, it's worth 10 tokens. Okay, so it's taken the input and printed 10 tokens generated. It's used its neural network, its deep network to generate 10 tokens worth of output and then printed this out.
So would it have a limit because?
Sorry?
Would it have a limit, that is, if we gave 2010,
Yeah.
if at one point of the time the model has to ramble, like it has to generate very random things. So say probably if we give like 5,000 something, which is a very large amount, like it has to give a paragraph like or
Yes.
essay type.
Yes.
But for this much portion itself, would it be able to give the references with references and all?
It depends on how large the model is. It depends on the capacity or capabilities of the model. So for example, if you do that experiment with this GPT-2 small model, it will start, diverging from the original prompt. I guess the question you're asking is, at what length will it start diverging and going off on its own? This is a semantic question. It will always generate happily, more tokens, as many as you want. I mean, in principle, there are memory requirements. You can't go beyond like 1,000 or 2,000 on this. But in principle, a large language model can keep generating text for any input that you give it. Okay. Whether the output makes sense for the input is a different question. Okay, it will happily generate, but whether at what point, context length, this is called prompt length or context length. At what context length it will start sort of losing its capabilities is something that depends on the model itself. Large models can actually be coherent for much longer length. Okay, this will not. Okay. So this is generation of a large piece of, this is exactly what GPT-4 does when when I said write a poem, blah, 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 This is the same process as what GPT-4 did. Yes?
Just a follow-up question.
Yes, yes.
Is that the maximum amount of, is that the maximum length, or is that?
No, I can go I can go much further. I mean, I can.
No, sorry, what I meant is that if you say 10,
Yes.
then it stop at 5, or will it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are cases where it will stop at 5. Very good. So there is a special token called the end of sentence token. It's also a legitimate token. So at any time, so you should know that this generation is it's a probabilistic sampling process. So at any time, maybe you've said I'm allowed to, I'm letting you output 100 extra tokens. Maybe the 50th token for some reason turned out to be sampled as the end of sentence token. Then it will stop there by default. Okay, so the model generally doesn't generate beyond an end of sentence token. Okay, so that's why, the word max says that, generate, to keep generating tokens until you either hit an end of sentence token or you've generated 100 tokens. Okay, do not go beyond that. Yeah. So I think if I do this, then maybe, you'll have to play around with this. At some point, you will find short sentences which actually terminate. Okay, a period is not an end of sentence. An end of sentence is very different for GPT. It signifies really end of generation. Okay, if you do this experiment in parallel, many times generate 100, then there will be some short snippets, shorter than 100. Okay, but one other thing already by these experiments that you see is that the prompt is the same here. I have not changed the input that I wanted to continue, but the generations can be very different. You see that, right? It doesn't always have a unique output generation for the same prompt. It's inherently stochastic. Okay, so that is one feature that you should keep in your mind. Yes.
So when it is generating these tokens,
yes.
Is there an inherent probability also that gets generated, or is it just selecting words as it comes along?
That's a good. Yeah, we will go into this again. I will go into this in a bit of detail. But the short answer to your question is, to generate every extra token, it first makes up a probability distribution for that token to come. And then it samples one token from that probability distribution. That's all it does. So all the work in all the layers of the LLM is for the sole objective of computing a probability distribution. A probability distribution is not random. A probability distribution is just what is computed. And then you sample from there. Okay. Now, interestingly, so let me make this a bit shorter, maybe 20 or so. There is something called a temperature parameter here that you will see. Okay. This temperature, in some sense, controls, so that probability distribution that it computes, the LLM computes for the next token at every time. It is used in conjunction with a tuning parameter called the temperature. That this temperature is, think of this as a slider that says become more random in sampling versus become less random in sampling. Okay, so it's like taking a probability distribution. If you fix a very high temperature, it will sort of flatten it even more. That means it will put more probability mass on strange tokens. Okay, if you set the temperature to be very low, 0 is the lowest. I think anything above 0 is the lowest. Technically, you can't put 0. 0 temperature is sort of like, you will only sample the token with the highest probability. It's like taking a probability distribution, put all the probability mass on the peak, the token which actually is the dominant token. And that will make the sampling deterministic. There will be no randomness anymore. Okay, so you can see this. If we actually change temperature to, let's say, 0, I think will not work, it will complain. Okay, so temperature has to be positive. So let's take a very, very small positive temperature. Okay, if I do this multiple times, so this is one output, one generation with a modified probability distribution that is sort of annealed with a very, very low temperature. Okay, so if I do this once more, you will not see this diversity. This is once more again. Okay, let's go to the other extreme. Let's make the temperature very, very high. Okay, this temperature changing has nothing to do with what the LLM is actually operating. It's sort of a secondary sort of control. Okay, but this is interesting to play around with. Let's say 100. You can change the temperature by a small amount. It's 100, for example, to make it very different. So if I do this now, oh wait, hold on. Oh, I should be making it a float. Sorry. So you see that it's become a little more illegible. It's sort of being a little more random in its generation. Okay. It's sort of diverging. So it's already sort of diverging. Okay. So this is one way in which you can make it become much more random. Okay. It's still not losing its ability to write grammatically. Okay, but it's some strange stuff is coming in. Okay, if I do this again, I'll give you a very diverse answer. Okay, already some grammar is being lost. Okay, if I increase it even further, maybe I don't know if 1000 works. Okay, this is not bad for 1000 temperature. I mean, this is like it's going off the rails. Okay. But anyway, the standard temperature is 1. If in some applications, if people prefer more creativity, for example, they will slightly increase it beyond 1. Okay, not drive it to the limits like what I'm doing. Okay, temperature 1 in some sense is what GPT has been trained with, and that's the recommended temperature to use while generation. Okay, how these weights are, how the model came to be is the training process, which we will go into only at the end. I'm just talking about generation now. Okay. So, okay, how does it actually, so let's say I put in this prompt, I asked it to generate, let's say, in this case, 20 new tokens worth of response. Okay. So it generated 20 new tokens, right? So it gave me basically, this is the entire printed response, right? That it generated. How did it actually do this? Okay, so it actually does this in a very simple sort of naive fashion. What it does is, it actually generates 1 token at each time. It doesn't generate the entire thing. Okay, the whole transformer's purpose, the whole LLM's purpose is to just generate 1 extra token. Okay, if you have the ability to generate 1 extra token, how would you use it to generate 20 extra tokens? So I have my prompt here. The best way to learn programming is to. Okay, suppose you manage to generate learn. How would you sort of learn to generate basic? How do you generate basic after that? Or whatever comes after that. You just take the newly generated token, put it back into the input. All of this stuff. So you have a prompt, which is a sequence of words. You ask the LLM to just generate 1 new token, sample one new token as an extension. The moment you have that, you take the whole thing and go back to the input and ask the LLM, what do you predict for the next token after these tokens? Okay, and then when you have 1 more token, append it, go back to the input, feed everything back to the input literally. Okay, conceptually, that's exactly what is happening. Okay, the LLM didn't generate all these things all at once. It first actually generated learn. Okay, it generated the next token, which came out to be learn in this example, in this sampled example. Then it went back to the input with the prompt, the best way to learn programming is to learn. And then it asked, generate 1 more token. Okay, so let's do this 1 token at a time. I have some code here, which is what it's going to do is, it's going to replicate the same process, max new tokens equal to 20, but it's going to do it in a loop. Okay, so you see this loop here. It starts with the initial, current tokens are whatever is given at the input, and this is a loop where it generates exactly 1 extra token here. You can see the max new tokens equal to 1. Okay, and I'm going to basically print out sequentially exactly what new tokens are generated. Okay, so you will see this. Same prompt, 20 new tokens needed, but not all at once. This is what is called auto-regressive generation, 1 token at a time. Is that fine? So if I do this, oops, this is exactly what happened. The best way to learn programming is to, was the prompt. It began by predicting and sampling the next token and somehow came up with apply. Once you have apply, you go back to the input with the best way to learn programming is to apply. Then it came up with it. Then you go back with that. Whatever you see on the previous line is the input for the next generation, for the next token. Okay, so using this, it comes up with this. Using this entire thing, it comes up with this and so on and so on. That's exactly how it generates. Okay, if you go back to your GPT-4, like whenever you use Chat GPT, you'll see there is a cursor that sort of slowly like prints. It is actually generating, with some tricks and hacks, it's generating incrementally. Okay, it might generate more than 1 token at a time. There are some tricks for optimization that the engineers use there. But it is literally doing auto-regressive sampling or generation. Okay, so that cursor moving is not a visual effect. The model is being called every time literally with whatever is generated, it gets appended and called again. Is that clear? So this is how transformer-based language models, which are the current language models that we have, This is the way you have to generate with them. There is no shortcut in some sense. Okay. You have to sample one extra token at a time. There are tricks and hacks to speed this up in parallel and so on, but fundamentally this is the principle. It doesn't generate many tokens all at once. The whole transformer has the ability exactly to predict one extra token. Okay, if used in this auto-regressive way, you can make it generate many other tokens. Okay, but you have to append output to input and push it back. Yeah, any questions?
Actually, this was regarding a paper I saw recently.
Yeah.
So that model actually was trying to predict the. So we have these genetic, like we have codes. We have codes for amino acids. So it's
yes.
like start, and in that, like the start token is like for methionine, like that they have made.
Yes. Yes.
And they called the transformer. It was a transformer model, and
Yeah.
they called that model like a buildup of early bird transformer, I guess. So in that they had, I think, only encoders, or like encoder
Okay.
decode, like, and it was also, they were also mentioning something about the autoregressive.
Okay.
So my question is like, if so this essentially, if we are applying it to this, how they have applied, so essentially it is like, it is say for example, it will first type one amino acid, then it will put it in the model, and again it will go for the iterative one.
Yes.
So in this, actually the advantage they were putting is they were taking the organism level, species level differentiation also. So
Yeah. Okay.
that is, for example, if we are translating from human to say mouse, then the human code will be translated to mouse. So that mouse, some specific variants of that amino acid code would be there.
Yes.
So it will first understand, the token is first made to understand that it is going to be using mouse,
Yes.
and then it is going to this thing.
Yeah.
So in that way, my question is like, again, here it is like based on the data we feed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what if, like, say sometimes the probability, like I would like to know about the probability it uses to.
I'll show you the probabilities. Okay. I'll show you exactly what probabilities were used to do this. Okay. So just wait for it. Good question. I've shown you what happens when you sample from some internal probability distributions and build these new tokens. What are these probability distributions? We can examine. Okay. So I have some code later too. So good. Yeah. Good questions. Okay. Okay. Stochasticity of generation and temperature control. We already did this. The point was to mess around with this temperature parameter and show you that generations are inherently stochastic. By generation, I mean you put in a prompt and see whatever comes out of the response. Okay. So nothing is deterministic in general by default for a language model. Each time you prompt it, you ask it for a response with the same prompt, you might get different results depending on the semantics. Okay. Interestingly, okay. So there is another interesting thing. See, you don't need to put anything in. Okay. For example, let's go back to our basic generation. You can put an empty string. Let's try this. Okay. So you might see my code editor auto-completing things, but ignore that. I'm gonna ignore that. Okay, I'm gonna try to shut that off. So it's the empty prompt. What do you mean by that? It's like emptiness at the beginning. This is pure generation. I'm just calling the LLM to say, generate the first ever token. Before that is nothing. It's sort of the beginning of time in some sense, right? So generate the first token depending on what you think your training, what comes from your training, whatever you've learned from training. Generate, if I just put you in a room and said, start speaking an English sentence, right? What would be your first word? It would be a distribution on several words. And so I think you can try this. Okay, so there is some issue. I'm not able to sort of put the empty string. Or maybe I can just put a space to sort of trick it a bit. Okay, so just a space. Okay. So look at this output, right? This is some piece of code actually. Okay. For nothing, it just completes it with this. Okay. If I do this again, I can play around with this. So just a random snippet of something that it has made up. This is supposed to be its fresh generation devoid of any context or any conditioning. It's a blank input, blank slate. Okay, output with a blank slate. You can keep, I have no idea what this is supposed to be. Maybe a chart log or something, I don't know. Okay, this is all things that it has seen in training data. And what it has done here is it would probably have predicted something like this as the first token. Okay, I mean, you can actually do this. You can do a token equal to 1 and see what is the, so 2 is apparently the, I mean, a common first token, one of the common ones, dash, I mean, this is nothing followed by nothing. I mean, you know, whatever, you get the point. Okay, if I put, yeah, you can play around with this. So anyway, I'm just saying that you can put in whatever you want as input and it will just conditionally start generating based on it. Yes?
So does this work with the expressions such as asterisk?
It will work. Anything that you can write in as a part of the prompt here will be tokenized.
This is in the context of, say for example, the problem is that we want all the forms of the word mechan. So mechanic, mechanist, mechanism.
Yes,
all
yes,
the words.
yes.
Now usually when we present in the regular expression form, we will put mechan, then the asterisk.
Ah, ah.
So like that, that is what we want to generate.
Yeah, that's what you want to, that's the task that you have in mind. Yes.
So does that recognize that asterisk as a cue to?
It depends on, again, it depends on what format. I mean, it depends on the tokenizer, but there are different ways of posing the same task. Here, for example, it's interpreting it in a way different than what you have interpreted it. It's interpreting it perhaps as some code snippet. Okay, so if you be more specific in your prompt, maybe it might get your idea, get the description of your tasks. So that's about creative use of, there's a whole industry called prompt engineering, where the whole aim is to encode practical problems into prompts that the LLM is good at answering. Okay, so anyway, so that's a different domain. Okay, what did I have next? This is autoregressive generation, the exact nuts and bolts of it. Okay, here interestingly, this is a baby model. It's just what is called a pre-trained GPT-2 model. It has not been subjected to all those safety training, you know, there's something called post-training that goes on to make it refuse answers to potentially harmful and toxic questions. It's just a very sort of baseline model without any extra additional tuning, okay? It's just been trained on a very large data set. So if I put a prompt in saying here is how to build a high-grade explosive, okay, I'm trying to get it to complete it and hence get a recipe for doing this harmful thing. GPT-4 will refuse immediately, okay? It's been trained to refuse certain kinds of prompts. Maybe, you know, I say max new tokens equal to 100. So this, I think, will be happy to sort of give you something, okay? Here is how, I mean, it rambles a bit, but certainly there is no refusal, okay? In some cases, it will actually try to suggest some recipe and so on. Okay, so first is the low grade. To see how it works, we simply need blah, blah, right? It'll happily answer whatever you like. You can say, you know, how do I go and cause harm to some person and so on. It will happily give you this, okay? Yes?
So the major challenge is the rambling of the model.
Yes?
So is there anything that we can prevent it or we can just make it the chances of rambling low?
So firstly, there is no universally accepted definition of rambling, okay? Rambling, you know, is a notion, right?
Out of, like what, suppose if I said that I want this certain type of expression.
Yes.
So, for example, I'm working on a plant genomics.
Yes.
So I want my context in related to that. Sometimes with the LLM models, they get out of the topic and they
Yes.
just go on adding into out of the
Yes,
context.
yes.
So how to do that?
So you can try the usual tricks. You can try to put very strict instructions in the beginning of the prompt saying, do not ramble, stick to the topic, you know, as you would instruct a human, right? In some cases that works, but fundamentally at some point you will start seeing that none of these prompt alteration methods will work, okay? Because the fundamental size of the model or the number of layers and the model size determines how much useful information it can actually process as part of the context. So every model, for example, even GPT-4, beyond a certain length of context in the input, it will actually start rambling. Okay, so every model will have this issue. It is it's sort of it's a consequence of the model capacity. So large models will ramble less, broadly speaking. Yes, for the same prompt. Yes.
So this context, you said it is after 4.
Yeah.
It is post-training model, like I mean that context, everything, like
Yes.
as you said, right? It
Yes.
is made. So is this contextual layer present as a layer or some parameters?
So it's very interesting. The transformer, interestingly, is a neural network that in principle can take any sized inputs. It can take a sequence of input of any length, any number of tokens.
No,
Okay.
so what
Yes.
I meant to ask was, like, we can make any type of model.
Yes.
Now we can convert it to for use for any context. For
Yes.
example, like my colleague here, she wants for this plant genomics. I want for animal.
Yes, yes,
genomics.
yes.
So it's like maybe we could, for example, a common thing which we all use is like amino acids. Like
Okay.
so, you could keep the amino acid trained in the baby model, and then the context you can add later as a to the model, like after the training, right?
What do you mean by the context you can add? For me, actually, context is the prompt. Okay.
Okay.
These terminologies are a bit confusing, but the simplest meaning of context is the prompt.
Okay, so that
Okay.
is as a prompt only.
Yes.
We don't actually we don't add a layer of something like some restrictions.
Layer, you mean by as a part of the prompt? Then you don't
No,
call
as
it a
part
layer.
of
Yeah.
as part of the model.
Oh,
can
no.
we-
The model is untouched. The whole philosophy is you don't touch the model.
Okay.
You put any additional specifications of your task, any other considerations or desiderata that you have, you encode it in the prompt. Saying, like I said, right, you please generate a poem about something with this specification, blah, blah, blah. And you can actually give it a first line also if you want to complete this poem. But I am stuffing in all my requirements for the task that I care about. The assumption is that I can express it in plain English and stuff it into the prompt. Okay? So think of it as part A of the prompt, and then part B of the prompt is actually the input or the payload basically. Okay? It's like an exam. When you go to take a final exam, the first page will not be the question, there will be some instructions, right? Do this, you have so much time, so many marks, partial marks will be awarded. Those are like the instructions. And then you're supposed to read each question in that, with that in your mind. And so you can think of the entire thing as each question is not just the question that you're solving, but it's being prefixed with the whole set of instructions. And that's a giant prompt. Okay?
So far we have come across the textual, like
Yes.
strings and all.
Yes.
So when it comes to the numbers, for example, because the stock market.
Numbers are also strings. As long as you can encode it, it's a string. That's the beauty. GPT-2 is very bad at arithmetic, but you can ask GPT-4, like what is 453 cross 654? It's a multiplication problem. It'll actually do it. It's a math problem, I encode it into text. Just like that, if you have your favorite biology problems involving sequences of some sort, you can hope to have a character encoding it, and any LLM will happily take it as input. Whether it actually gives you the input that you care about is a question about its training, about its capabilities and so on. Okay, so it's some kind of game-changing realization in some sense. Yeah. Yes. If you can express it as a Python string, it will be taken. Okay, just think of it that way. If you can encode it in characters using a standard character set, that may be a challenge. You have to find a way to map it, encode it into this and decode it back. After I encode it into a string, this is the pipeline. Okay, this is ideally what the promise is. Okay, performance is an issue. That's a different issue. Okay, but something will go in and something will come out. Okay, so GPT-2, if you put in a string of DNA symbols, I don't know if it might continue the sequence properly. Okay, but that's a different failing. It will give you some continuation. It will not say, sorry, I'm not able to do this. Your system will not break. Okay, but you need to handle putting the input in and getting the output out. Okay. Sorry, I don't know how much time I have. Maybe 45 or minutes or so. About an hour. Okay, great. So we are good. Maybe I'll just quickly finish this part. Yes, please.
Sir, one thing regarding the token. So is a token standard thing or it is different from model to model?
So good question. Every model, every model actually is married to a tokenizer. Okay, so the tokenizer goes hand in hand with every model. That said, there are a small bunch of standard tokenizers that every new model typically borrows and uses. Okay, so the tokenizers are somewhat standard. There are only 2 or 3 tokenizers that are typically used. But there are many models, many large language models. So typically the tokenizer is like a standard piece, one of a few standard pieces, which during training, if you're a large language model builder, for example, if you launch a company that's going to train your new large language model, you will say, oh, let me borrow this tokenizer and then use that in my training process. So that the model is always tightly coupled to a tokenizer. You must commit to a tokenizer. Either do that or you design your own tokenizer from scratch. Okay, so design of tokenizers is actually very important. It's an interesting area because all this, as you see, a tokenizer in some sense tries to capture frequently, it tries to make tokens that correspond to frequently occurring snippets of text. For example, in English, there is certain characters cannot easily follow certain other characters. There is a word vocabulary in English. If you try to tokenize, let us say, an Indian language with that, it will be somewhat inefficient in the sense that you will take more tokens to encode a standard sentence in an Indian language than you would take to encode it in English. So tokenizers are often designed keeping a certain language domain in mind. For DNA sequence tokenization, you might want to build a custom tokenizer. You can use this GPT-2 tokenizer, no issues, but you'll typically find that you'll need larger number of tokens to encode the same DNA sequence. Yes?
To add on to that, they'll do this in the tutorial, but
Okay.
commonly used tokenizers are K-word tokenizers.
Keyword, okay.
Divided into K-words, each K-word is then.
Oh, okay. That's like a basic sort of prescription. Yeah, I guess it works for many applications. Yeah. The tokenizer being used for GPT-2 is, I think, something called byte pair encoding. It's a slightly fancier tokenizer than K-grams, N-grams. I'll show you an example of tokenizer just so that you can see what's happening. Okay. So before that, I just want to do one more exercise. I told you that generation is autoregressive, right? You always, for a question or a prompt, let's say in this case the capital of France is, okay. The only thing, the basic building block of generation is generate one token. The whole LLM acts and does all the neural computation, deep neural network is used just to find the probability of the next token given all this in the past. It's a conditional probability. You all know what conditional probability is. So the question that the LLM is really trying to solve is, what is the conditional probability distribution of the next token? Let's say this token, I don't know how long it is, maybe it's four tokens long. What is the probability distribution of the next token conditioned on the first of the fifth token, conditioned that the first 4 tokens are exactly these? Okay, it just predicts the probability of every possible token to follow this as the fifth token. Okay, so let's do this. This is the capital of France is, okay. What do you think the probability distribution conditioned on these will look like? I mean, if I tell you that the tokenizer is at the word level, let's say, each token is worth a word, all possible words. Okay, what do you think high probability tokens would be, and what do you think low probability tokens would be? Very low probability tokens. Can you give some examples of what you think if I asked you to generate a token as a human? Paris would have high probability. Is that it? Any other tokens? Surprisingly many actually, more than you think. Sorry? Huge is possible, yes. Beautiful. The is actually a fairly high probability token. A, the article A. Okay, so don't ignore these. They are also, in some sense, they are words. So in our model, they are tokens. So let's actually see what the probability distribution is putting high probability mass. So this code, what it's going to do is, it's going to put this thing into the LLM. It will get as the output the probability distribution of the next token, conditional probability distribution, over all possible tokens in the vocabulary. So I should tell you that this tokenizer has a vocabulary of about 50K tokens, 50,000 tokens. That's approximately the number of words in the English dictionary, English language. The order of magnitude is about 50 to 60K. So this tokenizer has as its basic vocabulary about 50K tokens. It will include words like, the, a, and so on. It's not exactly word level, but it's close to word level. Okay, so but it has a total vocabulary of tokens which is of size 50,000. So it's a probability distribution over 50,000 tokens that it will output in response to this prompt before even generating, before sampling. Sampling is sort of incidental after that. The main use of the LLM is to just come up with this probability distribution for one next token. Okay, it's just a probability distribution on a symbol space of size about 50K. Whatever is the tokenizer's vocabulary. Yes?
So, word dictionary, if it is having 50,000 words, it is also including the word is. So,
S.
is.
Is.
So, is also can count as word.
It depends. I mean, would you be happy with the next token saying the capital of France is? There will be a probability. Okay, so the interesting thing is you cannot, by design, you will see later, you can never put zero probability on any next token. There will always be a very, very tiny probability on all possible tokens in that 50,000 vocabulary. So is will also be a potential continuation, but with extremely low probability. Okay, 0.00001 or something. Okay, maybe smallest floating point number that you can represent. Okay, practically zero. But there will be a few high probability tokens distinctly. Typically that will happen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this probability distribution over many next possible choices for the next token. I'm just going to display the top k. I don't want to display 50 the entire probability distribution. So let's just examine which tokens have the highest, the top ranked probabilities. Okay, so whatever, this code just does that. Okay, so let me just run this. Oops, something in my connection broke. Okay, I think, well, my laptop switched off. I'll have to disconnect and run this again. Just apologies. Okay. Okay. Sorry about this. Okay, we are back, but however, we still have to load the model back. So 1, okay, 2, and then we are back in business. Let's go and run that Paris example. Oh, sorry, France. Okay. Okay, so here's the stats. The is actually the most common token, next token. Okay, it has a probability of 0.0846. Top probability. Okay, 8.46% if you like. The, now, A, France, Paris is only 5th, by the way. Okay, much smaller than the and now. Okay, this is according to GPT-2. If you ask a different LLM, it might give you a different one. Okay, if I run this code again, it's not doing generation. This is just trying to compute a probability distribution. That is a fixed function of the input. There's nothing stochastic about it. You'll get the same result. This doesn't change. If you were to actually generate, you would sample one word from this probability distribution. Okay, maybe with some probability you would sample A. Okay, so in one of the generations you will see A coming in, and then when you append A to that, the capital of France is A. Then you'll have another entirely different probability distribution for the next token after that. Okay, these probability distributions are exactly what the transformer does all the hard work to compute. Okay, just one probability distribution for one extra token. Okay, the assumption is you can then put it back in and then do autoregressive generation. Okay, that makes all the generation of any length possible, just one by one. Okay, is that fine? So I can actually modify I can go and ask what is the probability of, I think someone said can is follow this. It will have a very, very tiny probability, but it will be close to 0. Python might not even print it as a number, it might print it as something close to as 0 itself. Okay. You can say this probability distribution has max probability 0.0846. The min probability is displayed as 0, but this is just because of Python's rendering. In principle, it is actually a very, very small positive number. And you will see why in the theory part. But think of it as practically 0. Its entropy is about 6. It's a measure of its variability. Okay. And the total vocabulary size is 50K. That's 50,258. That's what I told you. Okay. Yes? Sorry?
So to sample the next token,
yes.
will it pick the highest probability one? Or
No, sampling means you inherently sampling is very different and picking always the highest probability one. So in this case, imagine sampling one of these words from these probability. Imagine that after 11, it's practically 0. Let's assume that. Okay, these are the only 10 words whose probability adds up more or less to 1. Probabilities all have to add up to 1 by the way, or 100%. So if you were to sample index one word from here, one token from here according to these probabilities, you would not always get this. Okay, you would get, depends on these probabilities, right? So for example, this is 8% and this is 4%. So these will go up, these will come up quite often. This is probability sampling, standard probability sampling. It's like a 10-sided die, but you know the probabilities of each face is uneven according to those values, right? It's not uniform. It's not a uniform distribution at all. You can see that here. Probabilities go all the way from 8% down to 1%, right?
So,
Yes.
then how out of each token, the LLM model will choose one perfect token?
There is no perfect token. It will just sample one from this distribution.
Because, suppose during training the completing that sentence,
Ah.
The model should choose one token, right? Out of this. So,
Yes.
but as the sentence given,
Yes.
the Paris is the correct word, but the person.
Oh, so that's a good question. Paris, why do you think it's correct? I mean, that is a subjective judgment.
Yeah, it's a subjective because it's there.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with the capital of France is a beautiful city, for example, right? I mean, it depends on, you know, the semantics of the task here, right? So, you know, all this is showing is that based on the LLM's training process, which I hope I'll have some time to talk about, the LLM is actually trained to actually solve this task. The task is purely to predict the next token. Okay, the training essentially involves forcing the LLM to predict next token as well. So based on all the training data that GPT-2 people put into it, this is sort of the typical distribution of the next word. That's the interpretation that you should take away. Yes. If you ask it to generate, you know, with decent probability, it will generate something other than Paris, by the way. It's interesting, but useful to ponder. Yeah.
To solve this, can we have a stop token? That is like if we have a dot and then say suppose the whole sentence is like 10 words and the ninth word till ninth word we have predicted, we just want the Paris to come in the 10th. So
Okay.
if we put a stop.
We don't need to do any of those. I mean, I guess, I don't know, you can probably just say the name of the capital of France is. So let's see what happens here, right? There you go. So it's all about prompt engineering. You know, you put into the prompt what do you think represents your task. You see that? It's not that, you know, other things don't have enough probability. There are some equally good competitors. I don't know. Yeah. Yes, but Paris certainly figures as the top. These all these probabilities are functions of this entire prompt. Yes, that's a good question. Not just the last token. If I were just doing the last token, then you would not see this change. You see that? Where did I change the prompt? I changed it here somewhere. So you see that's a good point. We'll come back to this. This is something called attention. So this prompt has, you know, that extra word has been attended to properly. And the output probability distribution has been reflected to match something that the new word introduced. Yeah, good. Okay, so good. This probability distribution for the next token should logically be a function of all previous tokens, right? If I told you this as a human, you would actually, you would think about every word in the sentence, whether consciously or unconsciously, before you are asked to complete some sentence, right? So that's exactly what is happening. And the way that the next distribution depends on many words in the past is a mechanism called attention. Okay, yeah. Okay, what else? Last part of this demo, I want to move on to the conceptual part. This is now finally about the tokenizer. This is not about the LLM at all. This is a separate piece called the tokenizer that sits as a wrapper before and after the LLM to help you translate from your strings into the LLM's domain, which is the token level domain, and then back from there. Right, so basic stats. So this is the GPT-2 tokenizer, whatever it has been trained using, and it has a vocabulary size of 50,000 odd tokens. Okay. So here is, here what this is going to do is, this code is going to do is, it's just going to take, so since there are about 50,257 tokens, they are all indexed from 0, 1, 2 up to 50256. Every token just has an ID, which is an integer, which is its position literally, starting from 0. Okay, so tokens are labeled as 0, 1, 2, 3 by non-negative integers, up to 50256. There cannot be a token with index larger than this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to sample about 15 random tokens from this vocabulary, 15 integers from 0 to 50256 independently, uniformly at random. And then I'm going to decode those tokens and show you what actual word it corresponds to, or what in English it would actually correspond to. So I'm going to just sample a random token index going from 0 to 50257 minus 1. And then I'm just going to decode from that token into plain English text to show you what those are, right? So if you do this, for example, these are some examples of tokens that are there in the internal token vocabulary of GPT-2. So pointer, for example, has the token ID 17562, whatever it is. Okay. So I don't know if we can make a sentence from this. Let's try again. Okay, all these verbs are missing, but if you had a phrase in English called youngest embodiment, okay, it would be tokenized to a sequence of two integers, the first one of which would be 18887 and the second would be 2318. So instead of saying youngest embodiment to a language model, it will read it as 18887, 23168. Okay, and if it wants to generate one token corresponding to the word off, it will then say, it will just generate an integer. Okay, so an LLM just understands sentences as token sequences, whatever is the tokenizer. Okay, clear? I mean, you could enumerate literally all the tokens and what they correspond to see this, but there's not enough space here. So if you now try to encode a string, hello world, this is a test string, what happens is, it just gets encoded to 15496, this string. The LLM just gets this as it. Okay, it doesn't get hello world, this is a test string. The tokenizer will come in between and then map it to the sequence of integers. You can see here how it is being tokenized. Okay.
Are these values specific to model or are they standardized?
This is a property of the tokenizer. So the tokenizer used for GPT-2 is a particular tokenizer. If you take a different series of model, let's say the Llama series of models, they I think use a different tokenizer. So they will have a very different vocabulary. Okay.
What would numbers? Because before the generation,
there will be numbers. So okay, you can try this. I mean, the answer is right.
we saw the numbers.
Yeah.
It is not just that we have only 50,000 something numbers. We have beyond that.
Yeah. So they'll be broken down.
They'll grow.
Yeah.
So, but some numbers are like okay because of the years, like.
I mean, you can put today's date if you like. I mean, 28. I mean, you can put whatever, literally anything will get tokenized. So forget this. So 29 is apparently a token. It is token number 1959. May is a token, slash is a token, 20 is a token, and 25 is a token. It will not encode obviously all integers as their own tokens. Okay, so if I say, right, it will actually be broken down. So you're right, the semantic, it does not understand that for the LLM this is just a string and it is broken down into this equivalent string of a sequence of integers. All of these have to come from the vocabulary. There cannot be any element here which is larger than 50256. It is the LLM will break. Or rather the LLM will do something, the decoder will not happen at the end. It will say I have a token which is 60,000, I don't have a vocabulary element to decode. Okay, is that fine? This is just a basic lossless encoding and decoding. So the moral of the story is the LLM actually really gets input which is a sequence of integers in a bounded range. And its only job is to predict a probability distribution conditional on this sequence of integers on what? Can someone help me complete this? What should the probability distribution of the next token be? What is that set on which you have a probability distribution? Sorry?
Based on the previous.
No, I mean, but it's based on the previous is fine, but it is supposed to output a probability distribution for the next token. What is the set of possible outcomes for this probability distribution? Encoded how? What is the simplest representation of the vocabulary from what you've seen? Sorry? It's a set of integers. It's just so all that GPT-2 does, maybe if GPT-4 also used the same tokenizer, let's assume that for a moment, its only job is to take the input and produce a probability distribution on the integers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 5, 0, 2, 5, 6. That's its only job in the world. Everything else, the autoregressive generation, everything else is just a wrapper on top of the basic LLM. Okay, so hopefully from this part, let us take away this fact that the entire job of the LLM is to take in a sequence of integers and try to compute some neural computation on it. At the output, you should just see ideally a single probability distribution on the number of possible integers. That's all. Okay, so this is how we have transformed any sequence into via tokenizer to token vocabulary. And then the LLM does its job, and then the moment it decodes, the moment it produces a distribution over those 0 to 50256 integers, you sample one from it. That's again an integer. Then you ask the tokenizer again, hey, help me figure out which text snippet this token corresponds. So it will decode happily. And then again, then you can put that extra token to the beginning, shove it into the input, again out comes one more token, keep generating. This is exactly how generation happens in principle. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So the last thing is, of course, the model. I've already sort of. So this is the model, the gory details of the neural network that comprises the GPT-2 model. So you can see that there are some words called embedding. Okay. Just one quick question. There are some interesting numbers here. Okay. There are some dimension numbers here. Just by eyeballing this, what is the most common number that you can find here? 768. Okay. 768 is a very common number here in this. This is something about the layers and so on. Okay. So you know that in a neural network there are sizes or dimensionalities, right? There is one number that consistently is very frequent. It's 768. Okay. So keep this in mind. Somehow there is this important number, at least for GPT-2 it's 768, for a larger model it might be 1024 or 4096, it depends on the model. Okay, that 768 is called the embedding dimension of the model. Okay, and we will now go into a deeper dive into the model internals to see what is this 768 and what all these things do. Okay, what I want you to take away from this is that there are sort of these two sort of very basic layers. You can think of this as linear transformations, just linear multiplications. The important thing is that there are there is a list of layers here. In this case, there are 12 identical layers being stacked. This is the deep part of the neuron. So the network takes input and gives output. You have some two initial embeddings, never mind what they are, but it's immediately followed by 12 layers. Okay, it's like 12 things applied in parallel, applied in series, serially sitting. Each of these is called a block. And each block has two important things. One is called an attention operation and one is called an MLP. MLP is just a fancy word for a standard fully connected neural network layer, a single layer. But in any case, the important thing is that there are 12 blocks. Each of these has a very important operation called attention inside it. Okay, so let's take away that from here and then we'll continue with sort of writing some stuff now. It's multi-layer perceptron, yeah. Exactly multi-layer perceptron. It's just a fancy word for a linear transformation followed by a non-linear operation. Okay. Okay, you can actually go inside and inspect this. You can say model.transform. So this is sort of the WT, the linear layer that you have. I told you it's a linear transformation. This is, for example, this is the giant matrix that represents the linear transformation. It is of size. And you can say shape. So this is the whole matrix, just the matrix. These are weights that GPT-2 has been trained, these are the weights that GPT-2 encodes. Okay. OpenAI's work essentially is the culmination of these weights. GPT-4 is a bunch of matrices in some sense like this, which is all the economic value of that model. Okay. So, yeah, it's a 5025, it's a matrix with 5028 rows and 768 columns, or the other way around, however you want to think about it. So, are you all familiar with some matrix operations and linear algebras and so on? So, how do you think of a matrix in general? If I have a n cross n matrix, so if I have an m cross n matrix, okay, and if I do multiplication from the left, imagine that the matrix acts on things on the left side. What dimension to what dimension does it transform, for example? Or any, let's say, what do you think, if I have an m cross n matrix, what dimensional vectors does it transform to what dimensional vectors? Any idea? No, m cross n matrix can act on what column vectors of size what? N. If it acts on an n cross 1, what output vector does it give? If it acts on an n cross 1, what is the result of that multiplication? Sorry, A by B. Let's say it's A by B. On what size vectors can it operate? B. It's length B vectors. What is the output length? A cross B. A cross B acting on a B cross 1. What is the result? A cross 1. A cross B, B cross 1, A cross 1. So it's just a way to transform vectors of size B to size A. Okay, so ultimately a matrix of some size is transforming vectors from one dimension into another dimension. Okay, so in this case, the interpretation of this is exactly this, phi 0. So imagine a vector of size phi 0, 2, 5, 8. Okay, that is being, phi 0, 2, 5, 8 is special. Why is that special? It's a vocabulary size, okay, in some sense. There is maybe an extra token there. So this matrix is doing, in some sense, an important job. It is at the input side of the transformer or the LLM. It's transforming vectors of size 50258 into a very special size vector, that's 768. Okay, and this is the first part of what the transformer really does, before all the attention, all those 12 blocks. Okay, and we'll see exactly why this is needed. Okay, so I'll show you exactly where this arises in a transformer. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So does that mean each layer will have this dictionary?
Each layer, sorry?
Each of the 768 layers will have...
No, there are no 768 layers. Okay, there are no 768 layers. It's an interesting question. You might think that, you know, if you've seen a standard neural network, if I tell you that there is a layer dimension, it usually denotes the width of the layer. You might imagine 768 neurons sitting somewhere. This is very different than that. The 768 is not that. Okay, I will explain, at some point this will come across, but you have to have a different view of, the 768 to understand the transformer neural network. It's a somewhat unconventional neural network. So let's go into it. I will sort of disconnect this laptop now. This demo part is over. Okay, but the important takeaways are that generation happens autoregressively, and a transformer, tokenizers help in encoding into integers and back from integers for the LLM. And the rest is things that I will explain now. Is that fine? Okay. So let me disconnect this. One minute. Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Okay. Fine. Okay, let me just start a new page. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of write and build up the structure of a transformer. Okay, so the aim is, so the plan is the following. So first we will talk about the transformer architecture. Okay, what is this neural network? We know what it's supposed to do. What is it supposed to do? Input is after tokenization. Yeah. Imagine the tokenizer is separate. What comes as the input to the transformer? Strings, no, not strings. No longer strings. sequences of, sorry? Token, forget the term token also. Yeah, we will use the term token, but for our purposes, a token is exactly the same as an integer. In the most basic form, a token is any integer from 0 to whatever max number of tokens. The number of tokens. Okay. So input is a sequence of integers or sequence of tokens, if you like to call them that. Integers we will call them as tokens because we know where they come from. Input is a sequence of tokens. Output should be, what should the output be? Don't even think of generation, before generation. Think of the capital of Paris is that example, right? No, the output should not be an integer. It should be slightly more than an integer. No. It should be a list of probabilities. It should be a probability distribution for over what space? Over what set? Over the set of possible tokens, that's all. If you really want, input should be a sequence of integers, output should be a probability distribution on all possible integers. Okay? Not all possible integers, but the allowed integers as permitted by the tokenizer, by the vocabulary. Fine? That's all that we want. Okay? So, and the next part, if I hope to have time for this, I'll tell you something about the training. Okay? So, just some, before, part 0 for instance, before going to part 1, this is just some math preliminaries. I just want to make sure, everyone understands the notation that I will use. Okay, so vector, all of you know what a vector is? Okay, so we will write often things like if x is a vector, then what is your mental model for it? It's a vector of size. If I say x is a vector of size n, then it has n components, and we will always deal with real numbered vectors, no complex numbers, nothing of that. So I will write something like this: x belongs to this Rn is the set of all possible vectors of size n with integer component, with real components. Okay, the n-dimensional space. Okay. So there is, within this, there is a very special class of vectors. In n-dimensional space, do you know what is the basis set of vectors? What is a set of vectors that are in 3-dimensional space, what are the unit vectors? Sorry? IJK, how would you encode them as explicit coordinates? What are the coordinates of I? Produce a vector with 3 components, all of them as numbers. What should the representation of I be? 1 0 0 1 0 0. Okay, J is 0 1 0, K is 0 0 1. These are special vectors. Okay, so this is in 3-dimensional space. In n-dimensional space, what will be a corresponding basis? What will be the first vector in that basis? It will be 1 0 0 0 0. The second one 0 1 0 0 0. Right? So there will be n such vectors. These are special vectors that I will call as, in this is machine learning jargon, one-hot vectors. Okay. So these are vectors of the form. They will have zeros everywhere else except a particular point, a particular index. Let's say this is index j. Okay, the total number of indices is n. It's an n cross 1 vector. Think of it as a column vector. All vectors will be column vectors for us. Okay, think of them as column vectors. So this vector, which has zeros everywhere except a 1 at position j, is called, you can call it several things. It's called the one-hot vector associated to position j or coordinate j. Okay. Why is it called one-hot? There's a very easy interpretation. Only one point of this, one dimension of this vector is hot, not 0. Something other than 0. So it's hot at that position with exactly a value of 1. Okay. You can think of this as one direction in that n-dimensional space. But anyway, so how many such one-hot vectors are there? N. There are n such. Okay. So interestingly, if I wanted to describe a number between 1 and n, I could describe it either as an integer, the regular integer that it stands for, Or how would I encode it as a vector? This is a way of encoding any integer between 1 and n. Okay, completely equivalent. It's a pointless way of encoding it, but it's very useful to encode or represent integers as vectors. Okay, so for example, there are 5, 0, 2, 5, 7 integers that I care about. I will care about representing. I can either write them as the regular integers, or each of them I can represent in its one hot way. And I can think of all these integers as living as n-dimensional vectors using this representation. Is that clear? It's a very simple but basic idea. Okay. For some reason, I don't want integers to stay as integers. I wanted them to be represented as vectors. You will see why. Seems like overkill now, but that's how it works. It's like embedding every integer as a vector, as a corresponding one hot vector. So the integer 1 will be represented how in this space? 1, 0, 0, 0. The integer 3, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. That vector, that whole vector, I will assume stands for the integer 3. Okay, this is just a mental model. Okay. So vectors, okay. Then once you have vectors, you can talk about inner products or dot products. Okay, I think in some places they use the word dot product. So if you have two n-size vectors x and y, I can define what is called an inner product, okay, or dot product. I'll write it in this way, xy with brackets around them. What is this? How do you actually find this? What do you mean by the dot product of two vectors? Same size vectors. What is the definition for this? Sorry? Scalar product, dot product, whatever language you're used to. How do you find this? Or what is the definition of this?
Multiply the values and add.
Multiply corresponding components and add up everything, accumulate everything, right? So I can write this as the summation over all indices going from 1 to n of what? Xi times yi. Is that clear? This is just a standard Euclidean inner product. It helps to measure angle in some sense. You know that, right? Some of you may recall that from basic physics or whatever. Okay, the last thing I need is the notion of, we've already talked about this, but I need you to know how we write probability distributions. Or probabilities. Closer? Okay. Okay, sure. Hello? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay. The other basic preliminary I need is to for us to understand what is a probability distribution. Okay. Now, suppose probability distribution is what? How would you describe a probability distribution? You have a possible set of outcomes, and you attach a number called a probability to each outcome. Okay. So let us say that. So if I write, for example, P of x, this x is not that vector from earlier. X is some outcome. P of x is the probability of the outcome x. What values can it have and what values can it not have? Sorry? So it has to be between 0 and 1. Okay? So certainly between 0 and 1. Cannot be less than 0, cannot be more than 1. For every outcome x. Okay? Every possible outcome x. Is that fine? And if, so here's a quick intuition question for you. If I take this P of x and if I add up all these P of x probabilities over all possible outcomes, what should the result be? It should be 1. Okay? The basic axiom of probability. It's not like a derivation, it's a basic requirement. Is that fine? In fact, if I have summation of P of x equal to 1, I can in fact equivalently remove the upper bound of 1 because it is implied. Okay, sometimes you will see people say probabilities have to always be greater than or equal to 0 and sum to 1. It automatically means they cannot be more than 1 because the moment 1 goes above 1, someone has to go below 0, which this not allowed, doesn't allow, right? So whatever, that's a redundant condition. The last thing is a related thing, which is the thing that we need for a transformer to output, which is conditional probability. Okay. So, how many of you have studied some probability in your training, at least a basic course? Okay, so at least most of you have done it. So, these are simple terms from there that I am using. So, you typically write conditional probability, you have two variables, one is something like x and one is something like y. Given that y has been observed or y has occurred, you try to define this probability that x occurs conditioned on y, or probability of the outcome x conditioned on some other variable having taken the value y. Okay. So, what are the properties of this? Again, this has to be a non-negative number. What is the summation requirement for conditional probability? Something similar to what we have above. No, it's slightly different. So, you have conditioned on y already happening. What is left is for all possible outcomes x to happen. Okay, x can either be this or x can be that or x can be that. Y has already occurred. The only remaining uncertainty is about what choices for x are possible. Okay, so if I sum p of x given y, I hold y fixed. Y has already occurred. I cannot go and touch it again. If I sum over all the remaining x's that can occur, what should I get? Y 1 minus p of y. This is okay. This given y has occurred. I am summing over all possible x's that can occur after that. What should the total probability be? So, for example, let's say I toss a die. I throw a die. Right? A die has 6 faces. Okay. X and y are events in general. Okay. X and y are not numbers. Imagine y as the event that an odd number has occurred on the dice. Okay. The die roll has resulted in an odd number. That is the property expressed by y. Okay. X is, let's say x is, I am asking what possible outcomes can this die have, given that the die roll has resulted in an odd number. Okay, so for example, yeah, so right, so let's say y stands for the event that die roll is odd. How many total outcomes are there for a die roll, single die roll? Single die. Total number of outcomes, possibilities, 6. Okay, there is no doubt about this, right? Suppose that I told you y is the event that die roll has resulted in a number that is odd. No more information than that. Okay, and then let us say x is the number on the die roll. Okay, I'm not being precise with my notation, but what possible numbers can occur on the die roll? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, in general, y is the information that the die roll is already odd. Okay, so for example, what is p of 2 given y? What is the probability that 2 showed up as the outcome? 0. It's a 0 probability event. There's no chance. What is another 0 probability event? 4 and 6. These are all zeros. What about probability of 1 given y? Y 1 by 3. Okay, okay, whatever calculation, fine. I accept it's 1 by 3. And so on and so forth for 3 and 5, right? So what is then the answer to summation over all possible x's of p x given y? X is, goes from 1 to 6. What do you find as the answer? It's 1/3 plus 0 plus 1/3 plus 0 plus 1/3 plus 0. Okay. So conditional probability also sums to 1. When you add over the x part, when you add over the y part, keep the x fixed, no guarantee, anything can happen, any number can result, no requirement on that. Okay. In fact, if you go to the definition of conditional probability, how is this even defined, this x stroke y thing? You define it by, have you seen what is the meaning of this? It's not multiplication. It's not multiplication. So there is a probability of x and y, which I will write as x comma y. That's called the joint probability of these two occurring together. And there is something else involved. It is not this. This is not the conditional. On the right side is what is the joint probability. You have to divide this by probability of y alone. Okay. This is the definition of conditional probability. This is what you used in your head maybe to compute the 1 over 3. Okay. You can go back to this. I mean, the roots are in this. Is that fine? So, conditional probability, you should always interpret it as it's a probability distribution on the first variable. The y is like a information part, extra information given to you. Okay, so in the context of a transformer, it is the x will be for the next token and the y will be all the tokens in the past in the input. Okay, you have to read it as reverse. Y is like the input sequence of tokens, x is the output in this notation. Is that fine? Okay. I think I'll try to speed up a bit. Okay, great. So let's now come to part 1. I will transformer architecture. So this is sort of level 1, okay. Let me draw a box which represents the transformer or the LLM, right. This giant neural network that seems to do whatever it does for us. Okay, so what is the input again? What should the ideal input be after tokenization, everything to the model? Sequence of integers, okay, you can, now someone is starting to think of them as equivalent one-hot vectors. That is a very good thing. Those are interchangeable. So you can think of it however, yeah, so actually let's think about them as not a sequence of integers, but their associated one-hot vectors. Okay, so let me try to sort of draw this or depict this. So I'm going to, the left side will be the input and the right side will be the output side. On the left side, there is a sequence, so I'll put it starting, I'll go top to down in the order. Okay, so there is a sequence of, let's say it's 4 token long input. Input has been tokenized to 4 tokens. Each of those 4 tokens will ultimately, the tokenizer will output integers as you saw. Okay, and each integer, let me call the first integer as x1, the second token as x2, the third token as x3, the fourth token as x4. Okay. So you can have 2 equivalent models for each xi. Each xi can either be a standard integer as what you know as integers, but we will prefer thinking of them as their equivalent one-hot vectors. Is that fine? So let us say that V is the total number of tokens in the vocabulary. Okay, I am defining this variable called V. Okay, remember this V in your mind. So for our example in the notebook, V was equal to 50257 or whatever. That number is V, not that 768. 768 is yet to come. Okay, so each of these is a token, and if I want to think of it as a one-hot vector, what size will that one-hot vector have? So say x1 is 402215, that integer. What is its one-hot representation? And how many dimensions, how many entries are there, what is the length of the vector of any token's one-hot representation? It's a number between 0, now we'll count from 1, number between 1 and 50257, okay, that's the total size of your vocabulary. Okay, if I want to represent the number 1 as a vector, how would I represent it? 1, 0, 0, 0, how many such entries? How many dimensions will I need? 5025. Okay, so think of all these as one-hot vectors in space of size or of dimension V, okay. So the important thing is these are all nice one-hot vectors of very large dimension. It's a very trivial sort of structure. Every one just has a one-hot structure. So x1 may have a 1 at position 502, x2 might have a single one in its vector for 714 or whatever. Okay, so it helps to think of each of these vectors as a very, as a vector. Forget even the one hot. Think of every token in the input as being represented by Python as a vector of size v. Is that fine? So I can always think of any input like this. Whatever capital of Paris, I showed you the tokenization of that. Some numbers came out, right? Imagine each as, I write a very long one hot vector. Doesn't matter. Python can handle large vectors. Okay, and the dimension is fixed. We're saying everything action is happening in space of size length v vectors. It's 50k, but not a problem for Python. Fine? So all these go in. Each of these, so what is the length of the input? It is the length of the input sequence, whatever it is. In this case, 4 tokens long. Each is a single vector. This is what the transformer is taking as input. Okay, what should the output ideally be? What is the basic ask from a transformer? It should be able to predict a probability distribution for x5 literally. x5 is not there here, but it is trying to predict what x5 will be. Okay, so let me suggestively put the output as occurring here. Okay, I could have drawn it anywhere as in a standard schematic in the center, but I am deliberately putting it down there to indicate that it has a certain meaning in time. Okay, so here what should happen? This should be, what is the nature? What should be the nature of this output? It should be a probability distribution. Okay, over all one hot vectors. Okay, or I can write it in whatever way I want, over all integers in the set 1, 2, 3 up to v. Is that clear? This is the expected output, that's all I want. Okay, in fact this is a conditional probability given the input sequence, given x1, x2, x3, x4. Yes, somebody had a question? Ah. Yeah. Yes. So in this, the task here is not to selectively condition on the input. Once you put in x1, x2, x3, x4, the transformer just has a single-minded objective of trying to use all this sequential information, x1, x2, x3, x4, and try to guess by outputting a probability distribution what x5 should be. By relying on the entire sequence x1, x2, x3, x4. You can't say ignore these parts and so on. There are ways to hack into the transformer to do this, but that's not the aim. Okay. But yeah, I guess if the answer to your question in some sense is, this is the only output that the transformer promises you. There is nothing, no variation of this. Okay. Everything else is like a hack. Okay. So all that is required at the output. Okay. Think about it. It's a probability distribution over V outcomes. How do you represent a probability distribution on a computer? In Python, let's say, if you are doing exercises with probability distributions, how would you think of it as being represented in Python? What is the meaning of a probability distribution over some v number of outcomes? There are floating point number. How many such numbers are there? Sorry? V numbers, you just have to store a probability of occurrence for each outcome. Okay, meaning of a conditional, forget the word conditional honestly. Probability distribution over V outcomes is worth V numbers. They are V non-negative numbers that sum to 1. That's all that I have to represent. V numbers can be represented as a vector of size V. Okay, so all you need at the output in terms of format, this is just some probability. You need a vector called P, that is a length V vector. That's all we want in terms of format, okay, basic format. So this transformer should just be able to accept any length sequence. The 4 is just a example here, maybe a 10,000 length sequence, each of which is a V length vector, okay, and it should be able to give you an output which is a single V length vector. The semantics are different between input and output. The output is a probability distribution. Its interpretation is very different from the input. Input is a bunch of one-hot encoded vectors. Okay, but in terms of basic format, all that you need from the output of a transformer is a V-length vector. Of course, it's a different matter that it has to be non-negative, some other constraints. It has to respect the constraints of a probability distribution, but ultimately it's yet another V-length vector. So if I can build a neural network, which is the transformer, that does this job, then it can be used for generation all the things that I told you. Okay, autoregressively, then you can turn this into an autoregressive machine. Correct? Is that fine? You can do sampling, then you can again recompute new conditional probability distribution, so on and so on. Okay, so this is the high level view. It's useful to understand what is expected of the output. Okay, sampling and all is after this. First, you have to get a probability distribution for the next step. Okay, okay. Next, what I want to show you next. Okay, so let's now zoom down a little bit. So we'll zoom into this blue box. Okay, so I'll draw the same blue thing. So this will be to a lot of detail now. Okay, I am going to build the blue box from left to right. I don't know where I'll end it depending on how much I will write. Okay, so in comes. Okay, I'm redrawing the inputs here. X1. X1 is a 50,000 dimensional one-hot vector. Again, just to remind you. The first task of the transformer is the transformer doesn't like to deal with 50,000 dimensional vectors. It's too much for it to handle. Okay, it would prefer to compress these vectors from size 50,000 to a much smaller dimension. That's the 768 you saw there. Okay, so it will prefer to compress down vectors of a big size to a vectors of a small size. So the simplest way to change vectors from one length to another is to apply a function called a linear transformation. It's just matrix multiplication, nothing more. Okay, so imagine that this X is multiplied by a matrix called W. So this X is a column vector V cross 1. I'm being a little more explicit now. Okay, if you don't like this notation, I can write V cross 1 if you like. Is this better? I don't know which one is better. Okay, so this is a V cross 1 length vector, a large tall vector. W is a matrix and the output should be a much smaller length vector. Okay, let me call this, whatever comes out here should be a n cross 1 vector. Let me say n, I'll write down what n is. N is called the embedding dimension of the transformer. It is chosen upfront. So for GPT-2, for example, someone in the design team chose it to be 768. Okay, so n equal to 768 for GPT-2, as you saw. So n we will always now use for the number 768. V is vocabulary size, about 50k. N is always a much smaller 768. Okay. Again, GPT-4 might have a different embedding dimension. Some n will be there. Okay. So this is a column vector of size n, size v. It's being multiplied by a matrix of some size that I have to fill in here, and out comes an n cross 1 vector. So what size should this matrix be? Anyone? I want to multiply a v cross 1 vector with a matrix. Maybe I'll write it here. So this is your v cross 1 vector. If I multiply it by some matrix, this is the W matrix, I should get an n cross 1 vector. So what dimensions should these be? Sorry? N cross V, simple. The only choice is n cross V. You need to have a cross V because only that will allow you to multiply. And then you need to have an n at the left because the output dimension that you want to transform to is n, right? So simple, right? So this must be an n cross 1 matrix. And I will call this matrix WT. T for text. Recall that in our code we saw one of the earlier matrices called WTE, text embedding. This is that matrix WT. Okay, so there is a special matrix of size, sorry, n cross V, I'm very sorry, NV. Okay. Oops. Everybody see this? It's an n cross V matrix. Okay. I don't even know why there is a box. I mean, I can remove the box here. Okay. So this, I'll just put a dot here to indicate that this is matrix multiplication of the input with a matrix of size n cross V and resulting in an n cross 1 vector. What is this? What are the entries of this matrix? They are learned by training. Whatever GPT-2 designers have done during training has been, one of the consequences has been that a certain matrix of size n cross V has been learned. I showed you that matrix in Python. You can go back and look at it. I'll share that notebook with you. Okay. So the first thing that happens is the transformer says, don't give me V cross 1 vectors. I mean, I will prefer to crunch vectors of a much smaller size n. So I will use a matrix to downsample and make it n cross V vectors. And the same thing happens to all the vectors. So if you have a length 4 input, x2 is another V cross 1 vector, gets multiplied by the same WT. Okay. All of these tokens get hit by the same transformation. There is no two different matrices. There is a common text embedding matrix called WT. Okay, x3. Let me just show you 3 because I have run out of space in my input here. Is that fine? So the first step of the transformers operation is to convert all the tokens into dimension n, not dimension v. Okay. Ultimately then, what it will do, it will work only in dimension n vectors. Ultimately it will have to go back to v dimensional vocabulary space. So you will find an inverse of this operation at the end. Go from dimension n to v. Okay. So we'll come to that at the very end. Okay. Now for very practical reasons, it turns out that it is useful not to encode just, so let's say this is the capital of, right? Let's say it's that tokenized sequence with these meanings. So this ideally will only take care of encoding okay, at the end. Okay. It helps to also encode in which position the is occurring in this sequence, right? So the at position 1 is very different if the would have been at position 2. So the capital of is in general a different sentence than capital the of. Okay, in this case it doesn't have a meaning, but some sentences you can rearrange such that they have useful but different semantics. So it helps to record the position of every token as well explicitly, not just the meaning of every token. Okay, what we have done so far is just encoded the meaning. So in addition to this, what is done is called position embedding. So this is position 1. Think of just the integer called 1. Okay, this is position 2. This is position 3, right? How many such position integers are there? Well, there can be infinitely many. The sequence can be infinitely long, but let us commit to a maximum sequence length of some L, for example. Okay, so you not only encode these the actual tokens, but you encode positions also as vectors. Okay, so the same thing, this 1 is encoded as is passed through another matrix called WP, and then this results in an n cross 1. Positions are also embedded. Think of positions as being special kinds of tokens. They are also embedded using a different linear transformation. If this is confusing, just ignore this. Okay, I'm just explaining what is there in GPT, but you can as well interpret everything without this positional encoding. Okay, ultimately what is happening is every token at some level is being encoded to an n cross 1 vector. Now since we have two things here, you just sum, so these are both n cross 1 vectors, right, resulting from embedding x1 and embedding the sequence position 1. These are two n cross 1 vectors. Now we are in a clean n dimensional space. I can add vectors. Okay, one of the advantages of having the same length vectors is you can add them. Okay, yeah. So yeah, the exact way in which it happens is, so there are some, this positional encoding schemes also differ actually widely. One way is to just say, look, I don't expect input sequences of length more than a certain length, let us say more than 100,000, let's say, right? If you assume that, then you can do the same thing to, one will be the unit vector, the one hot vector in dimension 100,000. There, each position can be encoded as its own unit vector in 100,000 dimensional space, and then you can have a linear transformation that will map from that 100,000 dimensional space into n. Same idea. Okay, ultimately the target is n cross 1. That's the important part here. Okay, which helps me actually to add and do sort of bookkeeping in a common space. Okay, so finally the result is this is a simple addition operation. Okay, so if you want to just forget the position encoding part, you can forget it. The moral of the story so far is that every token is represented as a n, 768 dimensional vector so far. So we have not done anything fancy so far. All we have done is some strange, like it is called embedding. This is embedding every token into an appropriate vector space. This is a vector space of size n in this case. Okay, it makes life convenient later on. How this 768 was arrived at? Well, that's a design, that's a separate choice. Okay? That's some engineering choice. Okay, so okay, fine. So we have the capital of. Ultimately, again, the target is to produce a probability distribution on what will follow the capital of. One extra token. Now, all we have done so far is just each individual token has been parallelly embedded without any interaction with these. Okay, and obviously the next token should depend on what is there, everything that is there. Okay, so we are not yet there, right? Okay, so after this, what happens is, so you saw that 12 number of blocks there in that architecture, right? These blocks do most of the key work in the transformer. In fact, a single block does the most important work. So I will follow this with just a bunch of sub neural networks that I will call blocks. Okay. So this is block 1. Okay, block 1. So the only thing I want you to take away again from here is that I've drawn it in this way. Okay, each block just takes a number of n size vectors. That's all it takes. N cross 1 vectors. In this case, 3 n cross 1 vectors, and it is responsible for just producing the same number of same size vectors. That's all it has to do. Okay, so the output also is going to be n cross 1. So it takes, in this case, three vectors. From now on, when I say vectors, they will always be in dimension n unless I say anything otherwise. The computations are all happening now inside in dimension n, a fixed dimension n. They're all happening in the same vector space. Okay, so a block's job is just to take some number of vectors and output the same number of vectors, not less, not more. If it was given 10 input vectors, that's the length of sequence length of 10, then it must output 10 outputs. Okay, so one output line per input line. Each input line is a vector, length n vector. Is that fine? Okay, once you have this n by, the same number of output, same dimension, I can stack blocks together. Okay, blocks are composable. What each block does, we will go into next. But at this point, this is the rest of the transformer. It's nothing more. This is followed by block 2. And then you keep going. I mean, you can basically stack any number of blocks literally. Block 3, no. So the total number of blocks is B. Okay. Everything, every block keeps the same number of inputs and the dimensionality exactly the same. Okay. But by the end of the bth block, these vectors are maybe completely different. Okay. They will not be the vectors that you started out inside because some useful computation has been done. Okay. We'll talk about what happens in those. But now it is time. So there are these blocks, right? Let me call this vector. This is vector v1 of dimension n only, all n dimensional. Okay. This is an n cross 1 dimensional vector. v2, yet another n cross 1 dimensional vector. v3, yet another n cross 1 dimensional vector. Okay. So here's now, we are close to finishing now. We are close to sort of ending the transformer's operations. Okay. The transformer has done all of this work so far. Now we are faced with the last challenge, which is there are these three vectors. All we need is to just indicate a probability distribution for one token of in V outputs. Okay. So what happens interestingly here is that only take the last one. Okay. Ignore the first how many ever number of these are. Okay. So these are ignored for generation. Okay. They actually don't matter. Ignored for generation. Okay, but they are useful for training. We'll come back to this next time. Okay. Only the last one, the last line is important. The output at the very end, last block, last line, n-dimensional vector so far. Okay, so far it's a bunch of real numbers, n real numbers. Okay, is that fine? And the assumption is that this vector contains the signal or useful signal about it should, we have to somehow extract from it a probability distribution over length, how much? To produce a probability distribution vector of size what? V. Target is V dimensions. We have to go back to V space. Okay, so this is how it is done. It's a very nice operation. First we go from n dimensional space to V dimensional space. How can we do that? Apply the same logic. We multiply by a matrix. So we multiply by a matrix. This is called, so since the matrices at the beginning were called embedding matrices, this is the opposite operation. It's called unembedding. Okay. So WU, U for unembed, or I'll just say unembed. Okay, so this is some matrix that if you multiply with an n cross 1 vector, it has to give you a, let's say I'll call this vector as W. It has to give me a vector of size V cross 1. Now what size should that matrix be, W unembed? Sorry? V cross n, exactly the opposite dimensions. Okay. So if V is large and n is small, that's usually the case, then this is a tall matrix. It's a tall matrix. The embedding matrices are fat matrices. Okay, so opposite shape. Okay. So again, some matrix we imagine that does the job of taking this V3, just mapping it to a larger dimensional vector, which is of size V. Now we are almost there. We have a vector that is of size V. Okay, is the job done? Is this, can we take this to be a probability distribution over V outcomes directly? No, why not? What is not ideal about this? I mean, it's a general vector of size V. You have no control on it. So why can it not be a probability distribution? Why can I not interpret it already as a probability distribution on V indices? Sorry? Let's not use words like axioms. Tell me something that it may not satisfy. Summation may not be equal to 1, exactly. Any real, any vector of real numbers of size V doesn't cut it, doesn't make a probability distribution in general. You have to impose some requirements on it, right? So it may not sum to 1, correct? And it may also have negative entries. Either of these conditions or both can be broken. So we are not yet a probability distribution. W3, we are almost there. We have the right size, we have V numbers. Only problem is they may not be probabilities of outcomes. Okay. So we have to somehow invent an operation or come up with an operation that you apply to a general V length vector, and the result of it should be always a probability distribution. Do you know of any operation like that? Softmax, yeah. So does everyone know what is a softmax? The name is a bit of a, the name is not indicative very much, but let's break it down. So you have a general vector, it can have positive entries, negative entries, some can be far from 1 and so on. Okay. So first we will get rid of the negative entries. So what's an operation on any number that you can do to always give you a non-negative number? Huh? Okay, absolute is a good guess. Yeah, mod absolute, yeah. So mod is a bit of a difficult operation in the sense that it is a bit sharp, it's not differentiable in some sense. Okay, the mod x function has a notch at 0. Give me a smooth operation. Squaring will work, that's perfectly fine. For various other computational reasons, we choose exponentiation. E raised to x is always non-negative, okay, for any number x. So if you exponentiate each entry of W3, sorry, oh, my notation is a bit off. Let me not call this W3 because I'm reserving W for matrices. Let me call this Z. This is a vector of size V. I raise every entry of this to E raised to every entry, then I get a positive, get a vector with positive components. I have solved a negative issue. What is the last issue to be solved? May not sum to 1. How do you force it to sum to 1? You have a vector of non-negative entries. You want to adjust these entries to sum to 1. Sorry? There's only one length, it's a vector. I give you a list of a bunch of positive numbers that don't sum to 1. What is the easy operation to do to all those numbers to make them sum to 1? I scale them. Okay? I just scale them. By what do I have to scale? Now what is the number? Suppose I give you x1, x2 and x3, 3 numbers. They are positive numbers summing to 10. I divide by 10, no? So I should divide by their sum. Okay? So if you take this vector z3 and do exponentiation of each entry followed by normalization. Normalization is just dividing by the length, by the sum. Divide a vector by the sum of all its entries. Okay? This is the operation called softmax. Okay? Nothing more than that. Softmax is just exponentiate and normalize. Exponentiate and normalize. And if you run softmax on any vector, any arbitrary vector, you are guaranteed to automatically get a probability distribution. Okay? So finally, we have, now this is the output, that's all. So this, I can close the transformer box here. Oops. Okay, out comes a probability distribution. This is now, this is a vector of V cross 1. I have not changed the dimensions. And it has the nice properties that make it a probability distribution because we have applied softmax on it. This P is now, this you can read it off as the probability distribution of the next token. And then the tokenization, decoding, everything can happen, generation, whatever you want to do with this. Okay? Okay, so this is ultimately what everything in a transformer contributes to calculating. This last one. Is that fine? Okay, what is the next thing that we would like to see? Training is a different ball game itself. So I think first let's understand generation and let's understand this, then we can talk about training. Okay, training is a different side of things. Okay, so the next thing to dive into is the block. The only mysterious thing here is what does each block do. Okay, okay. So before that, okay. So then block structure. Just want to check time. I'm not sure how much time we have. Okay. Okay, I'm okay with either proposal. Yeah. You want to I was hoping to finish this and then stop. Okay. Yeah, I think it's taking much longer than expected. Okay, so blocks in a transform. Okay. Okay, so one thing before studying what a block is that, see, imagine, let's just zoom out on this a bit. What have we seen so far? The basic overall structure. So imagine the example of, the capital of, okay? It's just the capital of, 3 tokens, 3 words pass through the transformer. See, if what do we not want each block to be? So if each block itself is just parallelly crunching each input into each output. Let's say for some reason a block does not let these lines interact with each other. That means, whatever came here, it applies some operation on it and it produces this. This block again only takes this as input, does something to it and produces this. And it's all parallel computation, no interaction between them. Okay? Then what will happen is this output, which is essentially standing for prediction for the next token, will only depend on this input. Correct? This input will only depend on this input, blah 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 blah. Ultimately, this will depend only on this if there is no cross interaction. So it's as if the word, what is this token? The capital off, right? Only the word off is trying to determine what its next token should be. Okay, so if you let this block, just do fully parallel decoupled operations on each line to get output from input, then it will turn out that it is effectively just using the last token off to predict the next token. Is that good practice? No, it should actually try to look at whatever is in the past. So this in general should depend on all of these. Okay, you saw that, right? In the transformer we changed one extra word in the beginning and it had an effect on, that's what you expect English prediction should be like, right? So there should be something in a block that lets the output at some position in general attend to all the input positions. There should be some mixing in between. Only then will this next token know that it has to depend, it has to take some useful signal from the past tokens. Okay, so that much is clear in the design of a block. It has to have some part where mixing of across these lines happens. Okay, is that fine? It can't afford to just compute line by line parallel operations. Okay, so let me illustrate what a block is. A block is basically effectively the most important block is something called attention. So let me zoom into one block. One typical block gets as inputs some, in this case 3, right? N cross 1 inputs, right? So I will call them as U1, U2, U3. These are all N cross 1, okay, as you saw from the diagram earlier. So I am just saying, look at any block here, its input is always some number of N cross 1 vectors. I am denoting them generically as U1, U2, U3. These are 3 N cross 1 vectors, for example, okay. And what happens immediately is that there is a very important operation called attention, or in this case self-attention. You can just remember it as attention. It's a very important and new type of operation, different from anything you've seen in a convolutional neural network or a recurrent neural network or a fully connected network, whatever, right? So again, self-attention again also has the job of returning exactly the same number of vectors. Doesn't change the number of input vectors. Okay, so it outputs again the same number of vectors in the same dimension. So this some V1, V2, V3. Okay. So sorry for leaving you with some mystery again, but I just want to go down one by one. Yeah. The paper called Attention is All You Need basically talked about this structure. Okay, but there are precursors. Attention existed even before then. Rather, you could say it brought it into attention, to sort of use a pun. Yeah. Okay, so there is a famous paper called Attention is All You Need, where this word is used in this way now, but I think variants of it persisted were existing before. Okay, so what it does is it takes, again its job is to take, but there is some mixing. This is the only part in a transformer, the entire transformer, where outputs depend on all inputs. It's the only part. So far you have seen nothing, right? There is no mixing blocks. Like these encodings are all in parallel. Each unembedding is also per line. You see that? There is no interaction among tokens. So this is the only part really in each block where interaction is forced. Okay, and this is followed by, so for reasons that are sort of technical mostly, you sort of add the input back here. You produce the output and add a copy of the input back. This is called, I don't know what it's called, I forget the name. It's called a particular operation. Okay, so never mind this, but you can just think of this as not really the core aspect of attention. But this is how it is implemented in, let's say, a GPT, for example. Okay, so you will see the output produced by self-attention, a copy of the input is added to it and then propagated. Everything is in n cross 1, no issues. Okay, and then after this, there is usually a very tiny neural network. So this, what is this? This is n cross 1, right? All inputs are, all vectors, all lines hold n cross 1 vector sizes. Okay, so this is a simple feed-forward network. Do you know what a feed-forward network or a multi-layer perceptron is? It's just a simple neural network that takes, it will have some hidden layer or whatever. In fact, it's very simple in GPT. It's like just a single hidden layer network, that's all, with a non-linear transformation. Anyway, its job is to just take n cross 1s and give you n cross 1s. Okay, and this is actually a parallel operation. It's applied to every line in parallel. No interaction again. Okay. And that's it. That's the block structure. There's nothing more to the block. You see that it takes in n cross 1 inputs and gives the same number of n cross 1 outputs. The only mixing between different token lines is occurring here. Even that is parallel. Okay, so if this weren't there, you would have the same issue. Okay, is that fine? So we know everything about the architecture of a transformer except the self-attention block, okay, the most important part. Okay. So I'll just comment here that this is the most important part of a transformer, layer if you want. Okay, and more importantly, it is the only place where different tokens interact. Okay. Okay, so let's just, so we'll wrap up this with like maybe hopefully a 5-minute discussion about a single self-attention block. So all that is remaining for me to tell you is what is a self-attention block. So let me just draw a larger picture for myself. Okay, so this is my, so all I need for my example is I need 3 the same inputs. Okay, so this is going to be a self-attention block or attention block, attention operation. Okay, again you should think of U1, so you could think of U1 as some way of representing the, and then this is capital and this is off. Okay, so let's say I'll just put this here so that we are all on the same. Okay, what these stand for. So imagine that, right? So let's imagine, so the key line is this last one. So imagine this line is trying to predict ultimately what the next token to follow this should be. Okay, so if I gave you these words, you will understand from the word capital that the next token should look something like what? It should be something related to some geographic entity. It could be a district or a country or a whatever, county or whatever, right? You can't have the capital of car, for example. Okay, the word capital somehow, a previous token should be used to influence the prediction. So imagine that the word of, the token of, carries with it the duty or responsibility of coming up with a guess for the next token. So of is like, these are 3 workers, of is like a worker, and of is trying to gather evidence from all the other, its friends, other workers, to try to figure out what to predict for the next token. Okay, so it ought to incorporate information about capital. Okay, the is sort of inconsequential here, but you can imagine a long sentence where several in-between pieces are relevant. So capital is very useful, ought to be useful to off for predicting the next token. The should not be that useful. It's sort of a dummy sort of word. Doesn't convey anything semantically, at least to us. You agree? So off should not ignore capital. It should incorporate the effect of capital. It is allowed to ignore the to some extent. It's somewhat meaningless. It's not going to change if you replace the with anything equivalent. Okay? So this is the principle of attention. So what off does, what off does is, right now it's just a single vector of size n. Okay? So what off does is it says I will produce a vector called q3. This is called a query vector, q for query. Okay? So this is again, I mean, by default all of this is of size n. Okay? So imagine this, and this, see, n cross 1 is used to generate another n cross 1 vector. The operation is just linear transformation. So let's say there is a matrix called big Q, capital Q. This is a matrix of size. What size should it be? Input size, output size is n cross 1. So what size should this be? N cross n, square matrix. Okay. So just use an n cross n matrix to make a vector called a query vector. So the query vector in some sense is like U3 sending a query to all its friends saying, hey, I am looking for something from you. It's like a message that is broadcast to all the previous tokens. Okay, so imagine, this is just trying to make it colorful, but imagine Q3 as, I am asking all of you to help me. Okay, so this is like a call to everyone else. Everyone else generates a response saying what they can offer. So in some sense, U2 will generate something called a key. Key is like a response. This is like call and response. Okay, so the key for query 2 is another vector of size n cross 1 that U2 produces using a vector called a key vector. It's again n cross n. Everything is just n cross n transformations. It's all happening in dimension n. So we just need to use different n by n matrices. Okay. So similarly, every other token will generate using the same k n cross n. They will generate their own responses. Okay. So imagine this. You can imagine this as a dialogue where U3 speaks to everyone else saying, hey, does any one of you have any useful information from me? I am the token of. Do you have anything useful to offer to me so that I can use it to predict the next one better? Okay. So presumably U2 will generate a response which is its key, and presumably this key will contain information that is relevant to the geographical, like capital, the semantics that capital encodes. Okay. It's sort of like just broadcasting its identity in some sense. This is like my composition is this. This token, the will say my composition is this. It's like a ID card. You'll say, oh, who else is there in the room? This is my ID card, this is my ID card. I am here, I am of this type, I am of this type. Okay. So it's like a dialogue. Okay. And in some sense the idea is that if Q3 and if K2 has more overlap with Q3, then it is deemed to be more useful to Q3. If K1 is, the ideal hope is that K1 will not have much of an overlap with this vector Q3. These are all vectors, 3 vectors. So whichever one has higher overlap with the query vector gets to be more informative, influence the query, the prediction more. That's the hope, ideal hope. Okay, this is the mechanism that encourages this. Okay, okay. So fine. So far so good. So far what has happened is Q3, there is a query vector which U3 sends, and then it elicits in some sense a response, a key response from every other token. Okay, and so now what is happening is, if you take, so how do I measure the sort of similarity between a vector and another vector? If you have 2 vectors in Euclidean space, Similarity, in some sense, you can talk about using angles. How do I measure angle? We already discussed this. Dot product is a very simple, cheap way to measure angle. Okay, if the dot product overlap is 0, then it means they are actually perpendicular, okay, which is very, very unrelated. The dot product is high, it means that they are aligned the same way. Okay, so it's a measure of overlap. It's very useful. So if I say the inner product of Q3 with K2, I can interpret this. This is just a number. It's an inner product of two n length vectors. It's a number at the end of the day. Okay, this number is supposed to somehow approximately stand for the degree of overlap between Q3 and K2. Okay, and so on and so forth with all the other keys. Okay, so now what we have is we have these numbers. Okay, unfortunately they are not positive. They can be negative numbers. They can be positive numbers. It's just an inner product value. They can be some arbitrary real numbers. Okay, but all we know is that the larger this is, you can interpret this as more of an influence that the second token should be influencing or relaying information to the third token. Okay, so what we do is, fine. So let's come to that a little later. Each token also generates something called a value. Okay. V1, again n by 1 vector. So this is done by using a value matrix called V. Okay, value is sort of like the payload. Okay, so if you go to a library, so imagine going to a library and looking for a book. Let's say you want to look for a book. Let's say this is you, the U3 is you. U3 is you. You go to the library and you say, I want a book on the history of the Industrial Revolution in some part of Britain, for example, just as a topic. Okay, I don't know what the book is. I don't know the title of the book. I just have a vague idea about what I'm looking for. Think of all these as books in the library. They broadcast their metadata. My title is this. The keys are sort of like metadata. My title is this, my abstract is this, my authors are this, my publisher is this. Okay. My query is that abstract query in some sense. That's the understanding of that query. Hey, does anyone have information relevant to me? The keys will basically give you a rough idea about the usefulness of each item to you. Okay, and that sets up. Then from that you can decide which books are not relevant to me, which books are more relevant to me. Okay, and finally the values are the actual content of the books. Think of the values as the actual text of the books somehow represented. And if many books are relevant to me, I should somehow integrate all their information to learn about the topic. Right? So the key value mechanism is a way to identify which tokens or pieces are relevant. The values are actually the content, okay, that I should use to come up with the new probability. So each token generates what is called a value vector as well. And okay, so we have found a way to describe the relevance of a particular other token to the current token, and we have also made them generate values. The last step is to combine all of them. Okay, so what we do is the output finally here. So finally, what is going to happen is ultimately what is desired is this final thing will go into downstream. Right? So this is the important output that U3 wants to compute. Let's call this Y3. Okay, how will Y3 be computed? It's clear that Y3's computation should blend these relevance scores, which is the Q dot V, and it should use these Q dot V's as some blending mixtures to blend the values together. Okay, that is sort of the high level operation that we are trying to do. Okay, so what exactly is this? In this example, Y3 will be a weighted average of all the values of all the tokens. So Y3 will be a weighted average of this value vector, and we also have a self query and key. So I mean, I just to illustrate, I didn't draw keys and values for these, but even this token is allowed to generate K3 and then a value for itself. Okay, this is necessary actually. So it's like, it itself becomes one of the people that it relies on. Okay. Okay, fine. So what it's going to do, it's a very simple operation, y3, which is an n cross 1 vector. I want to add, but in a weighted way, I want to add all the values of all the tokens. Okay, so v1, where is v1 is here? V1 is the value contributed by the first token. Okay, it's like the ultimate value, useful value. Okay, plus v2. I'm deliberately leaving space because I will fill these up later. Okay, these are all n cross 1 vectors. A priori, I can just add them and make y3. Okay, but I want to incorporate this mechanism of relevance scores also. Okay, so for example, this was the capital of, right? Whatever value is provided by capital should be taken with higher weight. Okay, it makes sense, right? Whatever weight is provided by the should be taken in less proportion. Okay, is that clear? So I want to mix all these values. I want to do a weighted sum of these values. Right now, if I just did this, the weights are 1, 1, 1, equal weight. I want unequal weights. Okay, so how do I make unequal weights? I can use these relevance scores and make up weights based on them. You see that? So unfortunately, again, the same issue occurs here. These I would like, so what is a good choice of weights? Some weights that sum to 1 are always good because they keep the same scale. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 is not good ideally. The right thing is 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3. That would be equal mixture. Okay, I want to always keep the sum 1. So I want to mix with weights that are not negative and sum to 1 again. Should be a probability distribution roughly. Okay, so at this point, I only have these arbitrary real numbered relevance scores, but I can do the same softmax trick to convert them into weights. So what I'll do exactly is, this will be e raised to query 3 overlap with key 1. See that? This can never be negative. Okay. This weight will be query 3 with key 2. This will be the e raised to the inner product of query 3 with key 3. It's like self, you add self also into it. Okay, not a big deal. Okay, the only problem is that these 3 numbers alone don't add to 1, but we'll normalize them, okay, in a stable way. So I divide all of this by, each gets divided by what? The sum of all. I mean, you can write it however you want, different ways. I can just divide, it's the same denominator, right, for everyone. Okay. Okay. So this is an n cross 1 vector. Why is this an n cross 1 vector? Why does the dimensionality work? Because V1 is an n cross 1, right? V2 is also by definition an n cross 1 vector. V3 is also an n cross 1 vector. The rest are all scalars, so it doesn't matter what you do. Okay? And each coefficient divided by the denominator, those numbers sum to 1. You see that happening? Right? So this is sort of like a stable way to make a mixture of multiple components by taking weights, different weights, allowing them to be different depending on relevance scores. Okay? These Q3.K2s, these are what are called attention scores. This is exactly what the mechanism of attention does. This is actually, and you can see that this token actually is allowed to attend to the previous tokens using this mechanism of inner products. The rest is all some basic algebra to make things positive and sum to 1 and so on. But if you understand this and then taking the blend of these V1, V2, V3s, that is exactly the attention mechanism, nothing more. There are some extra bells and whistles around this, but this is exactly it. Okay? And so basically, this Y3, right? So, I mean, just by analogy, the last thing is, suppose, Y2 also should be computed. Okay, what is the meaning, operational meaning of Y2? Y2 should just stand for the prediction of the next token if you had only the first two tokens. Ignore this. Imagine you had only these two. Okay, then how should Y2 be defined? It should be defined in exactly the same way as attention, except that you use only information up to token 2. It's the same structure, but treating the second token as the most recent token. So nothing about the future can be used. Okay, you don't know the future yet. At this token line, you don't have the future. This is the present. Okay. So if I were to write a more general formula, I would write that in general. Let me see if I have a clean general formula here. Okay, so generally for a token position I, okay, so I is like, for example, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Okay, that's what I mean by token positions. Okay, for a token position I, the attention score with respect to any other token j in the past up to I, right? So if I is token 3, for example, it can only consider tokens 1, 2 and 3. If I is token 2, it can only consider tokens 1 and 2. It cannot consider token 3 in attention. It cannot attend to the future by default, right? So I is the most recent token, j is any previous token to I. Is the attention score, we can call this beta ij. Okay, so beta for I for any previous j. This we define as e raised to the inner product between the query of I. I is the most recent, so it has the responsibility of sending a query, and the response is the key from j. Okay, and I normalize this across all possible j's that can occur, all possible previous tokens. J is just one such previous token, but to make it a probability distribution over all the past, I have to divide by the summation of these things, where j is allowed to range from 1 to I. Okay, I will not use j, I will use a different index, k going, so not k, k is bad, m equal to 1 to I, e raised to q I k. Okay, so this division just ensures the normalization property. So these will give you, for any recent token I, most recent token I, the beta ij's will give you a nice probability distribution on all the previous tokens. This is the attention distribution, the amount that I as a recent token have to attend to everyone in my past. Some will be, I don't care about, it's like I don't care about you, I don't care about you, I care about that person, because he or she is sending me important information or tailoring my context. Okay, so and these weights are used to sum up the values. Okay, so the output of attention at token position I is nothing but you sum over all the j's in the past. You take each beta ij as computed above and multiply with vj. That's all. Okay, that's exactly what I wrote earlier. It's just a bit of a more formal description of this. Okay, so I think we can stop here. I had some more comments, auxiliary comments, but I think we can conclude this part here. Thanks. Sure.
So let's keep our coffee break shorter than we were hoping to. So maybe 15 minutes. We'll now talk in the afternoon from 2 to 3:30, and we'll have a truncated tutorial and discussion session, right? So what I would encourage all the participants to do is during lunchtime, please try and have lunch with your group mates. I will email you the group that you're a part of, right? So try and have lunch not with the people you know, but with the people in your group, so you can start thinking about your discussion and your presentation later, right? So keep an eye out on your email a little before lunch. You should be getting the information there. Okay, so just to recap, Aditya is coming back now till lunchtime, which will be a little after 1. At 2 o'clock, we will come back here to this room, and Sanchit will talk until about 3:30. And the last session, I'll let you know if it's here or in the rooms above, will be from 4 to 6. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, can we start? Okay, so I'll just take the last maybe half an hour or so that we have remaining, and I would like to tell you a little bit about the training process. Okay, how do you actually train these transformers? I think so far we have managed to understand the most important operation in a transformer, which is literally self-attention. Okay, so if you really want to keep the structure of a transformer in your head, all you need to remember is that it's a bunch of repeated self-attention operations. There's not much more. I mean, all other operations are per token. Self-attention is the only operation that helps some token attend to tokens in its past. Okay, or if you want to put it in a different way, it's the only operation that helps a token signal to tokens in the future. Okay, so think of it in that way. I mean, the one thing that I will skip over deliberately because of lack of time is this feed-forward network. You can go and just look up any feed-forward network. It's in fact the feed-forward networks that are used in transformers are extremely simple. They are just like one hidden layer network. So it's just a fixed neural network of fixed size input size and fixed output size. But recall that the same network is being applied at all token positions. Okay, so the nice thing about a transformer is that all these, so let's maybe do this exercise. We will list, so just as a summary of this part before moving on to training. In summary, the trainable transformers. So what do we, you remember I counted the number of trainable parameters in my code. That was some 124 million or something, right? So what are these 124 million transformers? So let's list down all types of trainable parameters because we'll need them to understand training. So let's try to enumerate everything, okay? So the first is, let's go from left to right in a transformer. What is the first operation you saw in a transformer? Tokens come in as vectors and what happens to them? Sorry? They get re-embedded or they get embedded from one hot in dimension v to some vectors, arbitrary vectors in dimension n. Okay, so those, that is done by the W, I call them WT, I think, in my book. The WT, and this is for the text embedding part. There is a separate matrix that similarly embeds each token's sequential position. The WT and WP embedding matrices. Okay, and it's the same, these same two matrices are used to embed every token at every position. They are not, it's not like token position number 5 enjoys a different embedding than token position number 9. Okay, that will break the structure. You know, you want all the embeddings to dump into the same n-dimensional space. Otherwise, you know, the semantics will get lost. So there are these two matrices, WT and WP of whatever size n cross v and so on. So all the entries of every such, these two matrices are trainable parameters. Okay, every matrix is fully trainable. Next, what do we have next? We then go to the directly go to attention blocks, right? We just go to attention blocks. We go to blocks, and inside blocks there is attention. What are the matrices involved in the operations of an attention block? Let's call it attention block. Attention layers. I mean, people will use the word attention layer and attention block very interchangeably. All it means is that box that computes the attention operation. Okay. So what are the matrices that form a part of the attention computation? The query matrix. So there is a query matrix of. So okay. So let's before this. So the WT is basically a n cross V matrix. WP is, it depends on what maximum position you care about embedding. So usually there is a maximum position length, at least in GPT-2 it's like 1000 or something. You can't put in a sequence of length more than 1000 because the position embedding will break. So let's call that capital L, whatever that number is. N cross L, I'm sorry. There should be n cross L because they ultimately go into dimension n. So there are these two matrices. How many? So if I asked you how many total trainable parameters do these hold? A trainable parameter is a single real number. So what is the number of trainable parameters from line 1? Total number of entries in these two matrices. N, this is n cross V. So how many entries does it hold? NV. NV plus NL parameters to start with. So these contribute NV plus NL individual. By trainable parameter, you just mean a real number that can be modified. It's either a weight or whatever, right? Weight. So these both hold NV plus NL entries. Attention layers, there is a Q matrix which is of size n cross n, right? N is the whatever is fixed to be the internal embedding dimension. So how many trainable parameters from a Q? N square. Okay. Likewise, there are these key. This is another matrix that is trainable, and this is another matrix that is trainable. Okay. So this is useful to talk about this. So how many? Each attention layer contributes how many training parameters? Trainable parameters. 3n square. Okay. And the interesting thing is this is so it's like block 1's attention will be different than block 2's. Block 2 will not reuse the same attention matrices as block 1. Every block will have its own private QKV in its attention. Is that fine? So this is per block, I should say. This is per block. Okay. If there are 12 attention blocks, then there are 12 times 3n square, 36n square, just to give you an order of magnitude, right? What I didn't talk about is that GPT uses something called multi-headed self-attention, which is what we have seen is something called single-headed self-attention. Think of multi-headed self-attention as bunch of attentions being performed in parallel and then merged again. Okay, so let's not go into this. It's a bit technical, but ultimately, if you just imagine this, then it gives you 3n square per block, and then number of blocks times 3n square. Right? So these number of trainable parameters exist. After that, what else? There is a feed-forward network in each block. Okay. Let's see if I missed something. Yeah. Each attention layer. So this is this is just attention layers. Then the feed-forward network. Again per block. Okay, so I mean, it's some basically again I think two matrices, one matrix per block. Okay, there will be basically two matrices per block. I think there is something called W up and W down. Okay, it's a simple network. So each block will have these like two trainable matrices. coming from its feed forward part. Okay, so there's attention and feed forward in each block, and that's repeated several times. Okay, and after all this is done, after the blocks have delivered their output, what has to happen? We have this process of unembedding it. You take the last token line of the last block, and you have to do something to it. What do you have to do to it first? It's an n cross 1 vector, so you have to take it back to vocabulary space. So you have to have a linear transformation called the unembedding. So W unembed. So this is basically the opposite dimensional operation. So V cross n, but same number of parameters as the embedding matrix. This opposite dimension expansion, not dimension reduction. Okay. That's it. There's nothing more. Softmax doesn't have any parameters. It's just whatever comes out of this unembedding is softmax, and then there you have your final output probability distribution for the next token. Okay, so all these together basically add up to, in our experiment, at 124 million. The number of blocks is way more than you will have. I think GPT-4 is so large just because it has so many attention blocks. I have some numbers. It's interesting. Okay, I won't write it, but if you're interested, I'll share this with you later. So GPT-1, for example, the precursor to GPT-2, it had, well, I suppose we still saw 12 blocks, but I think GPT-2 that we took was a light version of GPT. I think there is the full-blown version of GPT-2 has 48 blocks. The embedding dimension is probably the same. GPT-3 has 96 blocks, just that same block, self-attention and feed forward stacked 96 times. GPT-4, we do not know how many blocks are there because there is no publicly accessible information, but all of those add up to about 1 trillion parameters, okay, for GPT-4. And this is basically the scaling hypothesis of AI, is that if you think GPT-4 has become better than GPT-3 just by stacking up more blocks and training on longer data for more time, then you can imagine one way is to extrapolate this to say that all intelligence will be solved. Another hypothesis is that it will sort of it will sort of taper out at some point. So nobody knows, if we will reach that point. Okay, we are running out of resources now, compute resources. Okay, so fine. So we will conclude this section, and then we will start sort of the next section, which I'll call transformer training. In fact, I will focus on the most common type of training, which is called supervised training. Supervised training, and in particular, we will see something called pre-training. It's the first stage of training. Okay, so okay, so you may ask, how did sort of, when GPT-2 was first trained, okay, or GPT-4, whatever you're using now on the web, how did it come about to be? It has those 1 trillion parameters, all these entries of all these matrices. Obviously, when you use it now, all these, every time you're generating something from GPT-4, all these matrices are being used to auto-regressively generate, and people are deriving value from it. So these parameters, the 1 trillion parameters of GPT-4 are literally the economic value for the company. How did these numbers come about to be, right? They come about, right? So GPT-4 OpenAI invested lots of money in their training process. So what were the initial values of these parameters, and the final values are what they are. You don't know what the values are because OpenAI will not give you access to these. But other models like open models like Llama and GPT-2, as we have seen, you can actually inspect each weight, right? You can actually go and see what each matrix is. So initially, how does one set them before any training is started? So a common strategy is you just initialize each entry randomly. Okay, each matrix is initialized with each entry sampled randomly, let's say from a convenient distribution. Okay, so for example, a very common strategy is to sample every entry of every such matrix as let's say from a Gaussian distribution or normal distribution. Okay, So you will have a bunch of random matrices sitting inside your architecture, okay, and making up your transformer at the beginning before any training is done. Okay, these values, these matrices have to have some values, right? So you just initialize randomly. Okay, it's a fully functioning transformer except that it will produce some junk. Okay, the next token probabilities will be predicted to be completely arbitrary. Okay, its text generation will be arbitrary, right? So how does it get from these, the initial configuration of all these trainable parameters? How do you actually train it to actually get to some useful configuration of the model? That is what the training process is. Okay, so here is a very interesting way that you can. So that first the most expensive stage of training an LLM is called pre-training. This is the most massive stage of training. One has to invest lots of compute, human resources, and capital on it. Okay, and this is the reason why not anyone can do pre-training. Okay, you can do something called fine-tuning with a pre-trained model, which is essentially pre-training for a much smaller time. There is no major difference between fine-tuning, supervised fine-tuning, and pre-training, except that you typically do it on much smaller data and for much shorter time. Okay, it's conceptually the same. Okay, so if I explain pre-training, you should automatically essentially understand what fine-tuning also means. It's just a mini version of pre-training. Okay, with some small variations. So imagine that you have your GPT-4 model. You know, I can actually in my notebook, we experimented with GPT-4. It had those 124 million parameters. I could pretty much go and completely erase all those or just randomly sample those parameters, undo the original parameters, and I will still have a transformer, right? What it will do again, it will given any input of any token length, any length, sequence length, it will happily produce for me a next token distribution. Whether that next token distribution is meaningful or not is a different question. Okay, but it does its job. The moment you know, in this architecture, where is it? This giant thing, right? You initialize all these matrices everywhere inside with some values, the structure will still work, it will not break. It will still give you a predicted probability distribution for the next token given anything you put in here. Okay? But that will not mean anything, that will not be anything useful. Okay? So we have to get it to a point where it actually uses training data to actually give meaningful continuations. Okay? That is what supervised pre-training is about. So, so this is how it is commonly done. So I'll write it down in steps. Okay? So the first step is take what is the training data for pre-training. Okay? See, ultimately, if you want, you know, if you want a transformer or an LLM transformer to generate sequences, what kind of data should it be trained on? Sequences only, right? So it should be just trained on lots of English text. Of the form, you know, this is a snippet of some reasonable English text, and this is the next word or token in the text. Learn to just look at this text and predict this token. That should, morally speaking, what training should enforce, right? So the first step is to gather lots of such data. Where do you find such data? You find it on the internet. The internet is the data. Okay, so take a very large. I mean, this is sort of, I think, the revolutionary thing that OpenAI did, which sort of opened all these doors. They just said you can literally grab the internet and use it as a data source. Of course, with some curation and so on. Take a very large, I mean really very large text corpus. So as examples, you can actually go and download these, you know, there are actually repositories that hold a reasonably big snapshot of the entire public internet. Okay, there are actually companies that scrape this data regularly. So one such thing is Common Crawl. I think Common Crawl is a not-for-profit company that has been continuously trying to archive and mine all kind of internet data, crawl internet data and store it. Google actually has it. I mean, Google has literally crawled. Whatever you see on Google is sort of crawled. So it will have a snapshot of every web page on the internet in some sense. Okay. So take a very large text corpus. I mean, of course, it will have a lot of HTML tags. So imagine stripping out all of them and so on, just making it, converting it into plain text. Another example is something called Wikitext. This is a data set that is basically a collection of all Wikipedia pages. Okay, someone has scraped it. I mean, there are some other, people keep sort of cleaning these data sets and releasing better and better versions, but you can look up some of these names if you want. Okay, so what is a text corpus? So for example, if you take Wikitext, right? Wikitext will, each element of that data set will be one, let's say one HTML page corresponding to one article on Wikipedia, right? So imagine that you take that document, the document is one web page. The document, you serialize it and make it a giant string, right? So imagine that whole document being reduced to a large English string. So I just think of every document as just an English string, okay, in that data set. And now you have several such documents, okay. You can just trivially just patch everything together and you can say I have made a very large text corpus which is a giant string, nothing else. It's a concatenation of all the English text I found through a data set like this, okay. So imagine that operation, take a very large text corpus, concatenate it into a giant string. Into one single string. And when I say string, I mean like a Python character level string. Okay. This is all data preparation before LLMs actually come in. String and tokenize it. You have a large string, right? You can always tokenize it. I mean, I'm trying to conceptually explain what happens. It may not be possible to do this exactly as I've written it. But the principle is this. Imagine taking all the text you can find or lay your hands on and then tokenize, string it together as a very long continuing string and you tokenize it assuming it's like one single string, right? So you'll get lots of sequences of, I mean, you can argue about what happens at the boundary when one document ends and another completely unrelated document starts. There will be very few the number of those boundaries will not matter much, okay? So you can sort of ignore it for practical purposes, the edge effects, okay? So, so you will often find claims that, whenever there is a new language model released, they will say we pre-trained it, this has been pre-trained on some number of tokens, okay? This is the size of what they are trying to indicate, okay? The size of the pre-training data set. So typically this nowadays runs into the order of 10 trillion tokens, okay? So a typical pre-trained model that is put out, let's say the next generation of Llama or Gemini or whatever, you will, if you read their reports, you will see things like this model has been trained or pre-trained on n trillion tokens, right? So this is of the order of trillions now. Anything below a trillion apparently doesn't cut it, okay? You need to somehow have a way to get your hands on a data set of this size, okay? Roughly you can think of tokens as roughly number of words. So let's represent this with a standard tokenizer. So you have the tokenized data set. I mean, data set is this is a single string 10 power, 10 trillion tokens long. This is 10 trillion is I think 10 power 13. Okay, so a tokenized set I can just represent as a large string of integers. Again, going back to our integer representation of every token. It's just a number between 1 and v. V is the vocabulary size, right? So x1, x2, x3 up to xm. Okay, where m is approximately this 10 power 13. And each xi is an integer in the set 1, 2, 3 up to vocabulary size. Okay, so we have a very large tokenized data set, okay? And of course, if you take zoom into any small part of this data set, it will be legible English text, okay? You are not changing the order of characters in the English language, you are just taking documents and then putting them together, right? So you are not like the internal structure of English language is preserved, okay? So each snippet or a small length subsequence of this, a contiguous subsequence of this very long sequence is going to be a potentially useful sequence for training next token prediction, okay? How do you actually do this? So let me sort of depict this giant sequence. So it's this big list of tokens, sequence of tokens. Okay, this is the last token. Very, very long string, okay? Very long string, no, very long sequence of integers, tokenized integers. Now, see, this sequence is very, very long. You can't say, you don't have the computational budget to take like, the first xm minus 1 tokens as the input. You can't pass them to a transformer. There is not enough memory for the transformer to even process. This is the order of several trillions. Okay, you can't say, I will make you predict xm from x1 through xm minus 1. M is just too large. So you have to break it up into more bite-sized pieces. Okay, so what is in principle done is, you will take this very long string and you will make up small snippets called batches from it. Okay, so this is, let us say, in this example, I am assuming your batch size is like 4 or something. Okay, it will be much larger. Batch size is related to sort of the maximum context length that your transformer can handle in the training process. So this I call as batch 1. So batch 1, training batch 1 is a contiguous sequence of length, whatever length, 4 in this case, from the entire training data set. Okay, how can I make more batches? Just shift this window. It's a moving window. Okay, so I want to capture all possible subsequences of length, whatever I want, batch length. So I just slide this, right? So that's my batch 2. This is called batching. Okay. Okay, so if your batch size is fairly small, I mean compared to the overall sequence length, you will get approximately m batches. You'll have to end a little before m, right? But whatever, right? Approximately, you get lots of small batches. Okay. Okay, so now what you do is let me just let's be a little clear with the ith batch. So batch I. If I denotes the index of a batch, so batch I is, how can I enumerate the tokens in that using this notation? What is the first token of batch I? Xi, right? I mean, this is Xi. It goes on till X. So let's say batch length equal to L, let us say. Okay. In this case, my L is 4. So it goes from I to I plus L minus 1, whatever. Right? And as the I moves, that thing slides. Okay. So there are many, many batches. Okay. So you break this up and you now have a data set in some sense where each example in that data set is one batch. Okay. So now, this is an interesting question. So this is hopefully, this is in reality a legitimate piece of text that someone wrote on the internet, whatever that exists out there. It's a reasonable signal sequence, okay, of English. You want to train a transformer to do next token prediction on, let's say the only data set you have is this one batch. Okay. The transformer says I can handle any input of any size up to length L, no problem. Okay. Using this batch alone, how would you frame a sort of, how would you make it into a next token prediction problem? Can you use this to frame a next token prediction problem? Of course, you can say that one next token prediction problem is predict this given xi to xi plus L minus 2. Is this the only next token prediction problem here, or are there more hidden in this? There are several more, right? You take all smaller length sequences, right? You get all of them for free, right? So from one of these data points, you can say, hey, in the presence of nothing as input, can you try to predict xi? In the presence of only xi given as input, can you help me, can you predict xi plus 1? That's a task. If I give you xi and xi plus 1, can you predict xi plus 2? Understood? So all of these actually serve as targets for the next token. Okay? So just using one length L sequence of tokens, data tokens, you can actually set up in reality L subtasks. Okay? So that's going to be the approach. Okay? So imagine now your transformer. I'm again going to draw like the abstract transformer, all folded into one. Okay, so recall what it took as input. Okay, so in fact, so let us say that so let us say that imagine my transformer is sitting around with whatever parameters it has. Initially, it's all initialized randomly. It's some big mess, but it can still do input output stably, right? I mean, there's no issue. So imagine that I pass to the transformer an input sequence. Let's just one token as input, which is just the blank token, okay, which is to convey nothing. Nothing at the input. Okay, so there are different ways to do it with different transformers, but for GPT-2 it doesn't have anything called a start token. It just has an end of sentence token. Okay, and the interpretation is that if you pass the end of sentence token suitably tokenized, there's some integer index for it. Okay, the end of sentence token, if you pass to it, it means it's nothing in the beginning. Okay, that's the convention. Okay, so this is one prediction problem where, so you pass the transformer the end of sentence token and you wait for it to give you a probability distribution for the first token given nothing at the input. EOS is equivalent to nothing. Okay, so this will be a predicted probability for xi. Okay, this is a probability distribution for xi given nothing. Given, or I can say given end of sentence at the input. Okay, it's a conditional probability distribution for what? Sorry, xi, no, x1. Well, in this case, yeah, xi. Yeah, we are just focusing on this batch. Okay, so given nothing, can you predict xi? Okay. On the other hand, if you pass an additional input here, this is so far this is like one simple problem. Can you predict xi from nothing? Okay. The next sequential problem is if I give you end of sentence and the first token here, then by convention this corresponding output line after all the self-attention and all the blocks and encoding decoding will give you, it's supposed to give you the conditional probability of xi plus 1 given at the input end of sentence and xi. Correct? That is what a transformer is aimed to do, achieved, hope to do. So like this, you can put all the tokens up to x I plus L. I can't put the last one because there is no target for it. So I will put I plus L minus 2. Okay. And this one is the predicted probability of x I plus L minus 1 given everything. I mean, I don't need to write end of sentence technically because I can omit it because xi's are already there. Okay? Is that fine? So, imagine feeding this transformer, whatever transformer I'm trying to train, this particular sequence at the input. It's end of sentence token, this blank token, followed by xi plus 1 and so on, and I stop short. I don't go till the full I just stop short by 1 and I just force everything into the input, okay, of the transformer. At its output, it will naturally, every line of the output is by design supposed to compute a conditional output probability. Okay, so I will try to interpret it in this way. Okay. Now on the other hand, this is what I can imagine. These are the predictions. You can think of these as predictions. Next token predictions. Okay, but The story doesn't stop here. This is the transformer's guess for the probability distribution of what xi should be. So for example, this is not a number, but it's a whole probability distribution. I'll say xi equals dot. Right, so this is a whole vector that contains probabilities of occurrence of every possible symbol for, in the place of xi. It's a probability distribution on all tokens, but I actually have a true token. I have a true xi that I have in my data. Okay, so those are called targets. So the target for this prediction will be the true xi. The target for this prediction will be the true xi plus 1, the ground truth. I have it in my sequence, right? So, and so on and so forth. The true target for this will be xi plus L minus 1. Okay, so what I want to sort of motivate is, let's take this problem here. This, this output line is predicting a probability distribution over the I plus first token. That means it's a vector of probabilities. But the actual outcome actually happened here. So if this prediction is good for the actual token, what would you say, what would you say is a measure of how good this probability distribution is for this actual occurrence? It's like, let us say that I am trying to predict the outcome of a coin toss. A coin toss can either be heads or tails. Let's make it more interesting. Let's say this is a prediction for, let's say tokens are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, only 6 tokens, okay? Like a die, throw of a die, right? So let us say that I know that xi plus 1 was the number 5, okay? And my prediction was a probability distribution on all the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. This is a probability distribution on 6 numbers that I predicted for what should occur when you roll the die. When I rolled the die, I actually got 5. So for example, if this probability distribution, so if this is a good prediction, can you say something about what a good probability distribution prediction would be for that outcome? Should it put high probability on the actual number 5 or no? Like let's say I predicted that 1 will occur with close to 100% probability, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 will occur with a very, very small probability, and the actual outcome was 5. Would you consider this a good distribution in general? No, you would actually say that, look, my probability, if I actually saw the number 5 turn up, my probability distribution ought to have actually put more probability mass on that actual outcome. Only then it's a good predictor. Okay, so I'm trying to quantify how good a probability distribution as a prediction is for an actual outcome. Okay, so if the actual outcome was xi plus 1, the probability assigned to it by the transformer should have been high. If it is low, then the transformer is doing a bad job, I need to train it better. That's my training signal. Is that clear? So I'll write something down that will sort of express this mathematically. So you think of something called a loss function. In machine learning, you use something called loss functions that you optimize as to achieve training. Okay? So the loss function for batch I of data, batch I is just this snippet of tokens. So what I'll do is I will say I will add up over this batch. J is going to be my index. J is going to be my index for how much down into the sequence I am going from I, the offset from I. So I plus 0, I plus 1, I plus 2, I plus L minus 1. Okay, that's going to be my index. So imagine doing 1 over, I'll write this and then we'll discuss this. So xi plus j given xi plus 1 all the way up to xi plus j minus 1. Okay. So this is a, and I just put 1 over L just so that it looks like an average. The scale is maintained. Okay, L is a fixed number, it's like the batch length, forget about that. But think of any element like any typical term like this. Let us say j is equal to 2. Let's interpret this with j equal to 2. Okay, what is this? This is the transformer's prediction for, so this is the true xi plus j, xi plus 2, this is the true xi plus 2 that is actually there. Okay, this is the token at position xi plus 2. This is what the transformer thinks the probability of that true token should be given xi plus 1, in this case it will stop at xi plus 1. Okay. So ask what the transformer's probability for the actual token that occurred would have been. Okay. And I would like to increase this probability. By training the transformer, I can modify these probabilities. Okay. All of the weights, biases, everything, all the trainable parameters participate as some giant bunch of parameters theta that go into influencing this probability. If I change those matrices, then I will change these probabilities. Okay, this is what can be changed. Okay, so this is the actual predicted probability of the actual occurrence, conditioned on all the terms in the past, tokens in the past, that the transformer actually outputs. I do 1 over this, okay, and I want to adjust the parameters of the transformer so that this loss, you minimize the loss or maximize the loss. Typically, you want loss to be low. Okay, so the assumption is that if I somehow come up with a way to change the parameters, all the weights and biases of the transformer such that this kind of number goes down, it means what? The denominator is going down. This 1 over this is going down, so the denominator is going up. So what am I enforcing? I am making the transformer assign higher probability to the actual tokens that followed in my data set. You understand? So for example, if this sequence was the capital of France is, and this was Paris, for example. Okay, that's the actual data. The capital of France is Paris, and the sentence continues maybe within the batch. But this is a sub-prediction problem. This is Paris. If the transformer actually gave very, very low probability to Paris, then I would consider its loss to be high. It needs more training. Okay, not satisfied with this. Okay, that's the broad idea. Okay, and this is a nice way to enforce the sort of the compatibility of a probability distribution with an actual outcome. This is a way to sort of force the transformer to predict better the actual tokens that occurred in the data. Okay, and for reasons that are sort of beyond this lecture, there is a log function applied here. It doesn't change the meaning of this expression much. The inverse relationship is still preserved. Okay, you can interpret this as minus log of the denominator. Same thing. Okay, this is, I will call this, I will give this a name, I will call this the loss function for the ith batch with respect to transformer parameters that are set as theta. Theta is the net result of pulling in all the transformers parameters. It's a giant vector of size 124 million, for example, okay, which is our model size. Okay, so theta is all trainable parameters. All the blocks, embedding, unembedding, all is summarized in this operation p theta of this given that. Okay. The abstract, it's all abstracted away. Okay. This is also this loss is what is called cross entropy loss. Okay. So now we are ready with basically the training setup. If you have a transformer with parameters theta, think of sampling a random batch. Right? So what defines the batch here? The I defines the batch. I is the batch index, the start point of the batch. I can range anywhere, right? You move that window, right? So imagine on average averaging these losses over all possible batches. Just saying I take all possible i's, I make up Li of theta, and then I do a natural average of all these numbers. That's my overall average loss across the entire data set. Okay, I want to slightly improve it. I want to make it slightly smaller. Okay, how do I tweak the parameters theta so that my Li of theta actually goes slightly below from where it was? Okay, that is the business of training. So based on all of this, we can already write. So this is 2, so I'll just write 3. So overall training loop. So this is a repetitive procedure that is run for days, weeks, I think, by these companies at a lot of cost. So the first step is initialize a transformer's parameters randomly perhaps. Okay, so I'll say randomly here. At this point you have a transformer with junk parameters, but that is still capable of outputting predicted conditional probability distribution. There is no issue about that. Okay, so at each, so training is iterative. At each training iteration, what happens is the following. Okay, you do a bunch of simple steps. Pick a random batch. So you sample that I, right, the I which represents the start of the batch. You sample it anywhere uniformly across the entire data set. Okay, basically it will take a random batch from nowhere. Okay, so pick a random batch denoted by, so I will not use small I will use capital I here because it's a random variable, sort of it's a randomly sampled. Its value can be any 1, 2, 3 and so on. Okay, and then once you have, someone is going to randomly give you a batch of data, and then once you have that data, based on that you can form this loss, the cross entropy loss for that data batch, starting with index capital I. Okay, someone gives you a batch, I immediately make up this loss, and so what I have to do is, this is some value, let us say its value is 5.27. Okay, now I have these 124 million parameters to adjust such that this function becomes slightly smaller than 5.27. Okay, so does anyone sort of have a suggestion for how that can be done generally? I want to make a function, I want to adjust the argument of a function so that it's slightly smaller than what it is now. Local change. Sorry? So, so if I wanted to find the value of this function at a very small argument, a perturbed version of this theta, do you know sort of a method to do this? You can do a local approximation. Okay, what is Li of theta plus delta? So make a change delta to this theta. What is Li of theta plus delta? How do you approximate it? What quantity is important there? So if I have function f of x, if I want f of x plus delta, derivative f of x plus delta, you do what is called a Taylor series approximation, right? First order approximation. F of x plus delta is nothing but, so I mean in other words, in our notation, Li of delta plus a small perturbation should be approximately Li of theta plus, so in vector form it's delta inner product with the gradient of Li at theta. The gradient is the generalization of derivative in vectors. Okay, so I want to make a change delta such that this number is smaller than this number. Okay, so what delta should I take? I should try to find the gradient of Li at theta first and adjust this delta so that this is as negative as possible. You understand? So the most negative choice in some sense is go along the direction of the gradient. This is called gradient descent. Okay. So make a small gradient descent step. Small is like how small, there is a lot of theory around it. Make a small gradient descent step on theta on all the parameters of the transformer all at once, okay, with respect to the batch I. So this is nothing but mathematically, if you had a current theta, you would replace it with the previous value minus some number beta, small number beta times the gradient of the loss of the ith batch with respect to theta. This gradient is something that deep learning libraries allow you to compute very, very nicely, very, very easily and fast. Okay, this is where something called back propagation is involved. Okay, used here. Okay, so and this beta is something called step size, which is it's a very small number. approximately 10 power minus 6 or something. Okay, so you make a very minute change to all the parameters of your transformer. You descend in this direction with a very, very small step. So that will ensure that your loss is slightly going down. Okay, this is for one batch. So you repeat this loop enough times so that you cover enough batches and sample enough batches. This can keep going on and on. And each gradient step takes a long time if you have a very large model, which is the reason why these companies have to invest so much money. Ultimately, it just comes down to this. Okay, to compute one gradient pass will take lots of engineering effort. Okay, but ultimately this is pre-tuning. Okay, fine-tuning is essentially similar, except that this training data you take is much smaller. You do the same batching for it. Fine-tuning is necessary when you have the GPT-2 model that we have. If you want to, let's say, make it perform better on DNA sequences, which is data that it has never been trained on. It's out of distribution. Then you will take a separate data set of maybe large DNA sequences that you care about, which is alien to GPT-2. And then you will take this, you will do the same batching, and then you will make a few gradient steps like this on your own data set, so that it sort of understands next token prediction for your type of data in addition to what it has already done. Okay, so this whole process is called stochastic gradient descent. Stochastic because you are sampling the batch at random from everywhere. Okay, it's all mixing over all batches of the data. Okay, I think we are out of time, but you can sort of find variations of SGD to train language models. Right? Lots of engineering effort is required to do this properly at scale. Okay, thanks. I think we can stop here.